They say pride comes before the fall, but Cassandra Vale never imagined her fall would come at 70 miles per hour in the back of her own Mercedes. The woman who built a $1 billion empire was about to lose everything, not to a competitor, not to the market, but to her own arrogance. And the only person who could save her? The driver she'd just called a gorilla. This is the story of how cruel words, desperate circumstances, and 9 languages rewrote 2 destinies in a single rain-soaked night. If you're watching this, stay until the very end. You won't believe what happens. And comment below with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The rain came down like judgment over Manhattan, turning the streets into rivers of neon and regret. Inside the Mercedes S-Class gliding through the storm, Cassandra Vale pressed her phone so hard against her ear that her knuckles had gone white. The leather seat beneath her, Italian, custom-stitched, worth more than most people's monthly salary, might as well have been electric for how much comfort it provided. "What do you mean Tanaka-san pulled out?" Her voice cracked like breaking glass. "We've been negotiating this merger for 18 months. The voice on the other end, her chief operating officer, Marcus Chen, sounded like a man delivering a terminal diagnosis. The cultural liaison team flagged 3 separate protocol violations in our last correspondence. The Nakamura Singh group is calling it a fundamental misunderstanding of respect. Their exact words were, "Perhaps Nova Sphere Global is not ready for international partnership." Cassandra's reflection stared back at her from the rain-streaked window. A 42-year-old woman who'd built a tech empire from nothing, who'd been featured on the cover of Forbes twice, who'd given a TED Talk on the new face of corporate leadership that had been viewed 7 million times. That woman looked terrified. "Marcus, this is a $1.2 billion deal. $1.2 billion. Do you understand what happens if this falls through? We've leveraged everything, the Tokyo expansion, the Singapore office, the entire Asian market strategy. If Nakamura Singh walks, the board will have my head on a pike by Monday morning." "I know, Cass, I know. But without proper interpreters, without someone who understands the cultural nuances, then find someone," she screamed, loud enough that the driver's shoulders tensed in the front seat. "I don't care if you have to drag them out of the UN headquarters. We have the preliminary signing tomorrow at noon. Tomorrow, Marcus. That's less than 16 hours. She ended the call and immediately started another. Then another. Each one ended the same way. Apologies, explanations about short notice, suggestions to reschedule. Reschedule. As if time were something she had an abundance of, as if her entire company weren't hemorrhaging investor confidence by the second. The classical music playing softly through the car's speakers, Vivaldi's Winter, something she'd selected to project sophistication to potential clients, suddenly felt like a mockery. The violin's frantic pace matched her heartbeat. "Could you turn that down?" she snapped. The driver, what was his name again? Thomas something, she thought, though she'd never bothered to check, reached toward the dashboard controls. That's when everything changed. His hand, broad and capable, moved toward the touchscreen. For some reason, in her spiraling panic, that simple gesture ignited something volcanic inside her. Maybe it was the stress. Maybe it was the fear. Maybe it was 20 years of clawing her way to the top, of never showing weakness, of building walls so high that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be human. "Keep your gorilla hands off my car." The words left her mouth before she could stop them. Venomous, cruel, the kind of words that couldn't be unsaid, that hung in the air like toxic smoke. The driver's hand froze mid-reach. Then slowly, deliberately, he withdrew it and returned both hands to the steering wheel. The movement was so controlled, so measured, that it somehow made the moment worse. In the rearview mirror, for just a fraction of a second, their eyes met. His were dark brown, almost black in the dim light. And in them, Cassandra saw something that made her stomach clench. Not anger, not hurt, but a kind of weary resignation. The look of a man who'd heard worse, who'd learned to swallow indignities like bitter medicine, who'd built a shell thick enough to survive. Then the moment passed. His eyes returned to the road, his expression neutral as stone. The only sound was the rhythmic thump of windshield wipers battling the deluge and the muted rumble of Manhattan traffic. Cassandra turned back to her phone, but her hands were shaking. Not from fear of the merger anymore, or not just from that. From something else. something that felt uncomfortably like shame. She pushed it down, buried it beneath layers of justification. He was an employee. She was stressed. It was nothing. People said things they didn't mean when they were under pressure. It didn't matter, except it did matter. And somewhere in the part of her soul she'd learned to ignore, she knew it. The Mercedes turned onto Fifth Avenue, where the glass towers pierced the storm clouds like accusing fingers. Each building represented someone else's success, someone else's empire, and hers. Hers was about to crumble because she couldn't find a single interpreter fluent in Japanese and Mandarin with less than 16 hours' notice. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Strike out on interpreters. Everyone's booked. What do you want to do? What did she want to do? She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw something. She wanted to turn back time to 6 months ago when they'd first identified potential cultural friction, and she'd dismissed it as something we can handle later. She wanted to be anyone but herself, sitting in the back of this car, having just said something unforgivable to a man whose name she barely knew. The car slowed to a stop at a red light. Through the rain-blurred window, Cassandra could see a family huddled under the awning of a closed bodega. Mother, father, 2 young children. The parents were laughing about something, despite being soaked. Despite everything. The smallest child was dancing in a puddle, pure joy on her face. When was the last time Cassandra had felt joy like that? When was the last time she'd felt anything that wasn't anxiety, ambition, or anger? Miss Vale. The voice from the front seat made her jump. It was the first time the driver had spoken directly to her since the incident. His voice was deep, calm, with an educated cadence that surprised her. Yes? She tried to make her voice sharp, authoritative. It came out smaller than intended. We're about 15 minutes from your apartment. Is there anything you need me to do? Any stops? Professional, courteous, as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just compared him to an animal. No, she said. Then, because some vestigial part of her remembered manners. Thank you. The light turned green. They drove on. Cassandra went back to her phone, scrolling desperately through contacts, sending messages to people she hadn't spoken to in years. Every linguistics department head she could find. Every international consultant. Every favor she could possibly call in. Nothing. By the time they pulled up to her apartment building on the Upper East Side, a pre-war building with a doorman and a lobby chandelier that cost more than most cars, Cassandra felt hollowed out, empty. She'd built her entire career on problem solving, on finding angles nobody else could see, on being the smartest person in every room. And now, faced with a simple language barrier, she was helpless. The driver came around to open her door, an umbrella already deployed against the rain. She stepped out, barely acknowledging him, already mentally rehearsing the call she'd have to make to the board of directors. The call where she'd admit failure. Miss Vale. She turned back, irritated. What now? The driver stood there, rain pattering on the umbrella he held over both of them, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, I hope your situation resolves itself. It was such a simple statement, polite, generic, the kind of thing anyone might say. But something in the way he said it, the quiet dignity, the absolute absence of malice despite having every right to it, hit Cassandra like a physical blow. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and walked into her building. The apartment was dark when she entered, which was fine. She preferred it that way lately. The silence, the emptiness, no one to see her crumbling. She dropped her bag on the Italian marble entryway floor, kicked off her Louboutins, and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Central Park. The storm had intensified, lightning now fracturing the sky over the dark mass of trees. Her phone rang. Marcus again. Tell me you have good news, she said, though she already knew the answer. I don't. Cass, I've called everyone, every agency, every university, every professional I know. Nobody's available on this short notice, and nobody's willing to take on something this high stakes without preparation time. The Nakamura Singh group has specific cultural requirements, specific protocols. This isn't just translation, it's diplomacy. I know what it is, Marcus. She closed her eyes. What if we postpone? They've made it clear that postponing would be interpreted as another sign of disrespect. They've already shifted their schedules, assembled their entire executive team. If we postpone now, they walk. Permanently. So we're trapped. Yes. Cassandra ended the call and stood there in the darkness, her reflection ghostly in the rain-streaked window. Behind her, the apartment stretched out, 4,000 square feet of designer furniture and original art, all of it carefully curated to project success. None of it meaning anything. She thought about the family she'd seen huddling under the bodega awning, the dancing child, the laughter. She thought about the driver's eyes in the rear-view mirror, that resignation. She thought about the words she'd said, "Keep your gorilla hands off my car." And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Cassandra Vale, CEO, empire builder, woman who had conquered everything she'd ever attempted, felt the hot sting of tears on her cheeks. The next morning started with disaster. Cassandra woke at 5:47 a.m., 3 minutes before her alarm, heart already racing. The merger meeting was at noon. She had 6 hours to perform a miracle, and she'd run out of ideas somewhere around 2 a.m. when she'd finally collapsed into bed. Her phone had 43 unread messages. She scanned them while her coffee brewed, a process she usually delegated to her housekeeper, but Maria didn't arrive until 7, and Cassandra needed the caffeine now. 37 of the messages were condolences disguised as professional courtesy. "So sorry to hear about the Nakamura Singh situation. If there's anything we can do?" Such unfortunate timing. The vultures were already circling, sensing blood in the water. 4 messages were from board members asking for urgent conversations. 2 were from Marcus with subject lines that made her stomach drop. Emergency board meeting called for Monday. And "We need to talk about succession planning." What? Succession planning. They were already preparing to replace her. The coffee tasted like ash. She dressed mechanically. Armani suit, Cartier watch, everything projecting control she didn't feel. In the mirror, she looked perfect, polished, unbreakable. The woman staring back was a liar. At 7:30, her phone rang. Unknown number. "Cassandra Vale." "Miss Vale? This is Akiko Tanaka from the Nakamura Singh Group." The woman's English was impeccable, but Cassandra could hear the formality that meant trouble. "I'm calling to confirm your team's readiness for today's meeting. We understand there have been complications." "We're ready," Cassandra lied, her voice steady. "Everything is arranged." "Including proper cultural liaison representation? Our chairman has expressed concern about previous protocol oversights." "Absolutely. We've brought in a specialist." "Excellent. The chairman will be pleased. We'll see you at noon." The call ended. Cassandra stared at her phone, feeling like she might throw up. She'd just lied to a multi-billion-dollar partner about having something she absolutely did not have. If they showed up at noon without proper representation, it wouldn't just kill the deal. It would destroy Novasphere's reputation in the entire Asian market. She called Marcus. "I need you to be honest with me. Is there any possible way—" "No, Cass. I'm sorry. I've exhausted every option. Unless you know someone personally who speaks fluent Japanese and Mandarin, understands international business protocol, and can be ready in 4 hours, we're done. Unless you know someone personally." The words echoed in her head as she ended the call. Did she know anyone? Anyone at all? She pulled up her contacts, scrolling through hundreds of names. Business associates, old college friends she hadn't spoken to in a decade, networking connections, nobody who could help. At 8:15, the driver, Thomas, she reminded herself, his name is Thomas, texted her. "Good morning, Miss Vale. I'll be downstairs at 8:45 to take you to the office. Please let me know if you need an earlier pickup." She stared at the message. Professional, courteous. No mention of yesterday's incident. She should apologize. She knew she should apologize. But the words stuck in her throat, tangled up with pride and shame and the crushing weight of impending failure. Instead, she texted back, 8:45 is fine. Swapped it. The ride to the office was silent, except for the morning traffic sounds filtering through the car's excellent sound insulation. Thomas navigated the Manhattan streets with practiced ease, never speaking unless spoken to, eyes always on the road. Cassandra watched the back of his head, guilt gnawing at her. He had a daughter, she remembered from his personnel file. single father. That's why he'd taken the driving job. Flexible hours, decent pay. What was it like to swallow your pride every day, to be invisible, to be treated like she'd treated him yesterday? Thomas, she said suddenly. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. Yes, Miss Vale? About yesterday, what I said, that was... The words dried up. She, who had given presentations to thousands, who had negotiated with billionaires, couldn't complete a simple apology. It's forgotten, Miss Vale, he said quietly. We all say things we don't mean under stress. But the sadness in his voice suggested it wasn't forgotten at all. They pulled up to Novasphere's headquarters, a gleaming tower in Midtown, all glass and steel and architectural ambition. Cassandra's monument to her own success, soon to be her tomb if she couldn't pull off a miracle. Thank you, she said as she stepped out. I'll need you back here at 11:30 to drive me to the meeting. Of course. She walked into her building, nodded at the security guard, took the private elevator to the 47th floor. Her executive assistant, Jennifer, looked up with poorly concealed worry. Morning, Miss Vale. You have... I know what I have, Jennifer. Hold all calls except from Marcus or the Nakamura Singh group, and bring me every file we have on Japanese business protocol. Everything. Yes, ma'am. In her corner office, Cassandra stood at the windows overlooking Manhattan. Somewhere out there was someone who could save her. Had to be. The city had 8 million people. Surely one of them... Her office door burst open. Marcus, looking like he'd slept in his suit. Cass, we have a problem. What else is new? The Nakamura Singh group just arrived, early. They're at the Four Seasons. They want to meet at 11 instead of noon. Cassandra felt the floor drop beneath her. That's in 2 hours. I know. We don't have anyone. We don't have anything. If we go in there, if we don't go, we lose everything anyway. Marcus ran his hands through his hair. At least if we show up, we have a chance. Maybe their translator can bridge some of the gap. Maybe we can what? Wing a $1 billion deal? Marcus, these people have already flagged us for cultural insensitivity. If we walk in there unprepared again, we're confirming every doubt they have about us. Her phone buzzed. Jennifer. The car is here early. Mr. Reed says there's a traffic issue and you should leave now if you want to make the Four Seasons by 11. Thomas. The driver. The man she'd insulted. An idea flickered in her mind. Crazy. Impossible. Marcus, go to the meeting room. Stall them if you have to. I'll be there. What are you... Just trust me. She ran, actually ran, to the elevator, her heels clicking frantically on the marble floor. Employees stared as she passed, probably wondering if their CEO had finally lost her mind. Maybe she had. She burst out of the building to find the Mercedes idling at the curb, Thomas already standing by the rear door with an umbrella. It had started raining again. Of course it had. Miss Vale, we should leave now. Get in the back, she said breathlessly. He blinked. Excuse me? Get in the back seat. We need to talk. Now. They sat facing each other across the leather seats, the privacy partition down for the first time since he'd started driving for her. Rain drummed on the roof. Outside, morning Manhattan rushed past, oblivious to the desperation inside the car. Miss Vale, what languages do you speak? The words tumbled out of her in a rush. Thomas went very still. I'm sorry? Languages. How many do you speak? Your file says you have a master's degree. From where? His jaw tightened. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, why are you asking me this? Because I'm drowning, Thomas. My company is about to lose the biggest deal in its history because I don't have someone who can properly communicate with a Japanese-Chinese consortium. Because every interpreter in this city is either booked or unwilling to take the risk. Because in 90 minutes, I have to walk into a meeting that will determine whether I keep my job or become a cautionary tale in business schools. So please, her voice cracked. Please just answer the question. He looked at her for a long time, measuring something she couldn't name. When he spoke, his voice was careful, guarded. Harvard. I have a master's in linguistics from Harvard. The world tilted. And I spent 22 years as an interpreter for the U.S. State Department, trade summits, diplomatic missions, UN assemblies. I'm fluent in 9 languages, including Japanese and Mandarin Chinese. Cassandra couldn't breathe. 9 languages. Yes. And you're driving a car. Something hard flashed across his face. Yes. Why? How did you... She stopped, seeing the pain in his eyes. I'm sorry. That's not relevant. What's relevant is that I need you. My company needs you. Thomas, can you help me save this deal? He turned away, looking out at the rain-soaked city. Miss Vale, with all due respect, yesterday you compared me to an animal. Today you need my expertise. Why would I help you? The question landed like a slap, deserved and devastating. Because, Cassandra swallowed hard, because you're a better person than I am, because I'm asking, because... She stopped, started again, forcing herself to be honest in a way she hadn't been in years. Because I was wrong. What I said yesterday was cruel and inexcusable. You didn't deserve it, and I'm sorry. I'm truly, deeply sorry. The words hung between them, fragile and sincere. Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then, why should I believe you? What happens after today? I go back to being invisible? To being the help? No, Cassandra said firmly. If you help me today, I'll make you a senior vice president of international relations. Full executive package. You'll never drive another car unless you choose to. His eyes narrowed. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you what you deserve. What you should have had all along. She leaned forward. Thomas, I have 90 minutes to prepare for the most important meeting of my life. I need someone who understands not just the language, but the culture, the protocols, the nuances that can make or break international negotiations. You've done this before at the highest levels. You're exactly who I need. And if I say no? She sat back, honest to the end. Then I go into that meeting alone and probably destroy everything I've built. And I'll have earned it for how I've treated people, for how I've treated you. The rain intensified, a roar on the roof. Thomas looked down at his hands. Capable hands, hands that had once negotiated peace treaties and trade agreements that now gripped steering wheels. My daughter, he said quietly. She thinks I still work in diplomacy. I've been telling her I'm on special assignment. I couldn't bear for her to know I'd fallen this far. You haven't fallen, Cassandra said. The world failed you, but that doesn't mean we can't rise together. He met her eyes. If I do this, I need your word. Not just about the job, but about respect. For me. For everyone else you've looked down on. The accusation stung because it was true. You have it, Cassandra said. I give you my word. Thomas took a deep breath, then, tell me everything about this deal. We have 87 minutes to turn you into someone the Nakamura Singh group can trust. Relief flooded through her so intensely she felt dizzy. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet, Thomas said, pulling out a notepad from the center console. Let's see if we can save your company. And there, in the back seat of a Mercedes parked on a Manhattan side street, 2 people who'd been strangers 24 hours ago began the most important conversation of their lives. Thomas's pen moved across the notepad with the precision of a surgeon, creating columns and bullet points while Cassandra spoke. She'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone truly listen. Not just wait for their turn to talk, but actually absorb every word with focused intelligence. The Nakamura Singh Group is a hybrid corporation, she explained, her words tumbling out faster now. Founded by Hiroshi Nakamura in Tokyo and expanded through partnership with the Singh family in Hong Kong. They control semiconductor manufacturing, rare earth processing, and AI development across 7 countries. The chairman, Nakamura-san, is 73 years old, traditional, values protocol above everything. His son Kenji handles most Western negotiations, but the father has final say on all major decisions. Thomas nodded without looking up. And the Singh family representatives? Margaret Singh and her brother David, 2nd generation, Stanford educated, but they defer to Nakamura-san in all cultural matters. Margaret will be our primary point of contact. What were the protocol violations Marcus mentioned? Cassandra felt her cheeks burn. In our last video conference, I interrupted Nakamura-san while he was speaking. Apparently that's a significant breach, and our written proposal used his given name without the proper honorific. And she stopped, the shame acute now. And I suggested we cut to the chase during negotiations. which their cultural liaison interpreted as dismissive of the relationship-building process. Thomas's pen stopped moving. He looked up at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Miss Vale, you essentially told one of Asia's most respected businessmen that his traditional approach to negotiation was a waste of time. I know that now, but at the time I thought I was being efficient, American, direct. You were being arrogant. The words weren't cruel, just factual. You assumed your way was the right way." Yes. The admission hurt, but it was true. "So how do I fix it?" Thomas tapped his pen against the notepad, thinking. Outside, the rain had softened to a drizzle, and weak sunlight was trying to break through the clouds. The city was waking up fully now, taxis honking, pedestrians hurrying past with coffee cups and briefcases, everyone moving with purpose and urgency. "You don't fix it," he said finally. "Not today. What you do is show them you've learned, that you're capable of growth. In Japanese business culture, admitting fault with sincerity is far more powerful than pretending the fault never happened." "So I apologize?" "Not directly. Direct apologies can sometimes make things awkward, create obligation. Instead, you demonstrate through action that you understand what went wrong. You show respect through behavior, not words." Cassandra pulled out her own phone, opening the Notes app. "Tell me what to do." "Everything." Thomas glanced at his watch. A simple Timex, she noticed, not the Rolex or Omega most men in her circle wore. "We have 79 minutes. First, I need to understand the structure of this meeting. Who's attending from your side?" "Me, Marcus Chen, as COO, Sarah Williams, our CFO, and James Park from legal." "Good. Park's Korean heritage might actually help, shows diversity in your leadership team. Now, when you enter the room, who enters first matters. You're the CEO, so you might think you should lead." "Shouldn't I?" "No. In this context, you should enter last. It shows you consider the meeting important enough to make an entrance, but also that you respect the formality of the occasion. Marcus should enter first, followed by Sarah and James, then you." Cassandra typed frantically. "Okay, then what?" "Business cards. Tell me you brought proper business cards." "Of course, we had them specially made." "In Japanese?" She stopped typing. "No, just English." Thomas shook his head. "That's a problem, but we can work around it. When you present your card, hold it with both hands, facing the recipient so they can read it easily. Bow slightly as you offer it, not too deep, just a respectful nod. When you receive their card, take it with both hands, study it for a moment to show respect, and then place it on the table in front of you in the order people are sitting. Never put it in your pocket immediately. Never write on it. Both hands. Study it. Don't pocket it." She typed as fast as her thumbs allowed. "What else?" "Seating. There will be a specific arrangement. Nakamura-san will sit at the head of the table, likely with Margaret Singh to his right and Kenji to his left. You should sit directly across from him, with Marcus to your right and Sarah to your left. This creates visual balance and shows you understand hierarchical structures." The Mercedes windows were fogging slightly from their breath and the temperature difference. Thomas reached forward to adjust the climate control, then caught himself and pulled back. The gesture wasn't lost on Cassandra. He was still operating under yesterday's rules, where touching her car's controls warranted abuse. "Thomas," she said quietly, "this is your car too now. You can adjust whatever you need." He met her eyes in the rearview mirror, searching for sincerity. Finding it, he nodded once and adjusted the temperature. "When the meeting begins," he continued, "there will be small talk. This isn't wasteful, it's essential. They'll ask about your flight, even though you didn't fly anywhere. They might comment on the weather, or the hotel, or something neutral. Engage with this. Don't rush. Americans want to get down to business. Asians want to know who they're doing business with. How long will the small talk last? Could be 5 minutes, could be 20. Let them guide it. When Nakamura-san shifts the conversation to business, everyone else will follow." Cassandra's phone buzzed. "Marcus, where are you? The Nakamura Singh team is in the lobby. They're early." Her heart hammered. "Thomas, we're out of time." "Then we work fast." He leaned forward, his voice taking on an intensity she hadn't heard before, the voice of a man who'd once negotiated treaties worth billions, who'd sat across from world leaders and found common ground in impossible situations. Listen to me carefully, Miss Vale. The most important thing you can do today is be present. Not thinking about the next quarter's earnings, not rehearsing what you'll say next. Actually present. When Nakamura-san speaks, listen with your whole attention. When someone makes a cultural reference you don't understand, don't pretend you do. Be humble. Be teachable. But I'm the CEO. If I seem weak, there's a difference between weakness and wisdom. Nakamura-san has built his empire over 50 years. He knows the difference. Thomas checked his watch again. We need to go. I'll drive you to the Four Seasons, and during the drive, I'll brief you on key phrases and concepts. You're not coming in? He looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Miss Vale, I'm your driver. No, Cassandra said firmly. You're my senior vice president of international relations as of right now. Jennifer can process the paperwork later, but you're coming into that meeting with me. I'm wearing a driver's uniform. She looked at him, really looked at him properly for the first time. He was right. The black suit was clearly a chauffeur's uniform, complete with a company pin on the lapel. But underneath it, she could see what she'd missed before. The straight posture of a man who'd walked with diplomats. The intelligent eyes of someone who'd mastered 9 languages. The quiet dignity of a person who'd refused to let circumstances break him. What size jacket are you? She asked. 42 long. Why? She was already texting Marcus. Emergency. Need men's suit from our corporate wardrobe. Size 42 long. Best we have. Bring to lobby immediately. And get Jennifer to draft an employment contract for Thomas Reed, SVP International Relations. Have it ready to sign today. Thomas stared at her. You're serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. She met his gaze. Thomas, I need you in that room. Not just for your language skills, but for your expertise. You know how to navigate these situations. I don't. I need you. For a moment, emotion flickered across his face. Surprise, hope, something that might have been relief. Then he schooled his features back to neutrality and nodded once. Then we'd better make sure you're ready. He put the car in gear and pulled into traffic. Let's start with honorifics. When you address Nakamura-san, you always use san after his surname. Never his first name unless he explicitly invites you to use it, which he won't. The same applies to everyone else in the room. As they drove, Thomas drilled her relentlessly. The difference between hi and I. The significance of the bow, shallow for equals, deeper for those you respect more. The importance of silence, of pauses, of leaving space for consideration rather than filling every gap with words. In American business, silence is awkward, he explained as they turned onto Park Avenue. In Japanese business, silence is where wisdom lives. If Nakamura-san pauses for 30 seconds before responding, let him. Don't jump in. Don't explain. Just wait. This is so different from how I usually operate. I know. That's why you need to understand it's not about changing who you are. It's about showing respect for who they are. Thomas navigated around a stopped delivery truck. Think of it like this. You wouldn't wear a bathing suit to a funeral or shorts to a black tie event. This is the same concept. You're code switching, adapting your approach to fit the context. They were 3 blocks from the Four Seasons when Cassandra's phone rang. Unknown number again. Cassandra Vale. Miss Vale, Akiko Tanaka again. I wanted to inform you that Chairman Nakamura has requested the meeting be conducted partly in Japanese. He feels this will allow for more nuanced discussion. I hope this won't be a problem. Cassandra looked at Thomas. He nodded once. No problem at all, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. We're prepared for that. Excellent. We look forward to seeing you shortly. The call ended. Cassandra let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Thomas, what if I mess this up? What if... Then we adapt. His voice was calm, grounding. Miss Vale, I've been in rooms with people who were literally enemies, who'd spent decades at war trying to find common ground. This is business. It's high stakes, yes, but it's not life or death. Remember that. Stay calm, stay present, and trust yourself. They pulled up to the Four Seasons, all Art Deco elegance and old money discretion. Marcus was waiting in the lobby, looking frantic, holding a garment bag. Thomas parked and turned to face Cassandra fully. Last thing before we go in, what's your goal for this meeting? To save the deal. No. His voice was gentle but firm. That's not the right goal. The right goal is to begin rebuilding trust, to show them that Novasphere understands and respects their culture. The deal will follow if you get that part right. Cassandra absorbed this, letting the wisdom of it settle. She'd spent her entire career focused on outcomes, on targets, on winning. Maybe that had been the problem all along. Okay, she said. Let's go rebuild some trust. They stepped out into the cool morning air. Marcus rushed over, his eyes widening when he saw Thomas. What's going on? Who's this? Marcus, meet Thomas Reed, our new Senior Vice President of International Relations. Thomas? Marcus Chen, my COO. Marcus looked like he'd been hit with a 2x4. Your driver? Cass, have you lost your... Marcus, I need you to trust me. Thomas has a master's from Harvard in linguistics, spent 22 years as a State Department interpreter, and speaks 9 languages, including fluent Japanese and Mandarin. He's exactly who we need. Marcus turned to Thomas, skepticism and desperation warring on his face. Is this true? Yes, sir, Thomas replied. And if you have 5 minutes, I can brief you on what Miss Vale and I have discussed regarding protocol for this meeting. Something in Thomas's bearing, the confidence, the competence, must have convinced Marcus because he nodded. The changing room is this way. Let's get you into something more appropriate, and you can talk while you change. They moved through the Four Seasons lobby, all marble and gold leaf and hushed elegance. Hotel staff moved like ghosts, present but unobtrusive. Cassandra felt like she was walking through a dream, or possibly a nightmare, she couldn't tell which. In the changing room, a private suite the hotel kept for exactly these kinds of emergencies, Thomas pulled on the suit Marcus had brought. It was Armani, charcoal gray, with a crisp white shirt and burgundy tie. The transformation was startling. The driver disappeared, replaced by the diplomat he'd once been. While he dressed, he briefed Marcus with the same efficient precision he'd used with Cassandra. Marcus listened, and Cassandra watched the realization dawn on his face. This wasn't some desperate gamble. Thomas knew exactly what he was doing. One more thing, Thomas said, adjusting his cufflinks. Simple silver, borrowed from the corporate wardrobe collection. When I'm translating, I may occasionally add context that wasn't in the original statement. Trust me on this. Sometimes a literal translation loses meaning. I'll be faithful to the spirit of what's being said, not always the exact words. Understood, Marcus said. He turned to Cassandra. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think you might have just saved us. We haven't saved anything yet, Cassandra replied. Let's see if we can make it through the next 2 hours without destroying our entire company. Jennifer appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand, looking harried. Miss Vale, the contract is drafted. Mr. Reed, I'll need your signature later, but for now... She handed him a temporary Novasphere ID badge, already printed with his new title. Welcome to the executive team. Thomas took the badge, staring at it like it might disappear. For just a second, his carefully maintained composure cracked, and Cassandra saw the emotion beneath, relief, gratitude, disbelief that his life had just changed this radically in under 2 hours. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank us yet, Cassandra replied, echoing his earlier words to her. Let's see if we can actually pull this off. They took the elevator to the private meeting floor where the Nakamura Singh group had booked an entire suite of conference rooms. In the elevator, Sarah and James joined them, Sarah looking immaculate as always in a navy Chanel suit, James in his standard lawyer armor of black pinstripes and wire-rimmed glasses. Someone want to explain why our driver is now an SVP? Sarah asked, her CFO pragmatism on full display. Long story, Marcus said. Short version. He's a former State Department interpreter who speaks 9 languages and might be the only reason we're not about to crash and burn. James adjusted his glasses, studying Thomas with lawyer intensity. State Department. Which administrations? Clinton through Obama, Thomas replied evenly. Trade negotiations primarily, some diplomatic missions. I have security clearance documentation if you need verification. We'll want that, James said, but his tone had shifted from suspicious to respectful. For now, welcome aboard. The elevator doors opened onto a corridor decorated in subtle Asian aesthetics. Watercolor scrolls on the walls, cherry blossom arrangements on side tables, everything speaking to careful attention and cultural respect. "They chose this floor deliberately," Thomas murmured to Cassandra. "The Four Seasons has a Western-style conference floor, and this one. They picked this to see if you'd notice, if you'd appreciate the effort." "What should I do?" "Comment on it, not directly, but reference the cherry blossoms. Mention how the space feels peaceful. Show you see what they've done." They approached the conference room doors. Through the frosted glass, Cassandra could see figures moving. The delegation was already inside, waiting. Her hands were shaking. She clasped them together to hide it. Thomas noticed. He leaned in close, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Miss Vale, I've seen you on stage giving presentations to thousands. I've read about your pitch to venture capitalists when you started this company, how you walked in with nothing but an idea and walked out with $20 million in funding. You have courage. You've always had it. Today you just need to aim it in a different direction." Something about his words, the absolute confidence in them, steadied her. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and nodded. "Remember," Thomas said to the whole team, "Marcus enters first. Sarah and James follow. Miss Vale enters last. I'll come in behind her but stand slightly to the side. Let them see me, but don't make me the focus. We want them curious, not confused." Marcus reached for the door handle, paused, looked back at Cassandra one more time. She gave him the smallest nod. He opened the door. The conference room was stunning, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, a table that looked like a single piece of polished mahogany, chairs that probably cost more than most people's cars. But Cassandra barely noticed any of that because her attention was entirely captured by the people sitting on the far side of the table. Chairman Nakamura sat at the center, and he was exactly as she'd imagined, elderly, dignified, with white hair and a face that suggested decades of wisdom earned through experience. To his right sat Margaret Singh, younger than Cassandra expected, probably mid-30s, striking in a way that spoke to both intelligence and heritage. David Singh sat beside his sister, and Kenji Nakamura flanked his father on the left. Behind them stood three others, translators and assistants, Cassandra assumed, but it was Nakamura's eyes that held her, sharp, assessing, missing nothing. This was a man who'd built an empire through careful observation and patience, a man who would see through any deception, any false courtesy, any attempt to manipulate. Marcus entered and bowed, not too deep, just as Thomas had instructed. "Good morning. Thank you for meeting with us." Margaret Singh rose and returned the bow. "Good morning, Mr. Chen. Please, come in." Sarah and James entered next, repeating the same greeting, the same bow. Each time Margaret responded with grace. Then Cassandra stepped through the door. The room seemed to hold its breath. She bowed, deeper than her colleagues had, acknowledging that this meeting had been called because of her mistakes. When she rose, she looked directly at Chairman Nakamura. "Nakamura-san," she said, her voice clear and steady, "thank you for this opportunity. Your willingness to continue our conversation honors us deeply." Thomas entered behind her and translated her words into Japanese, his accent perfect, his tone carrying exactly the right note of formal respect. Nakamura's eyebrows rose fractionally, the first sign of surprise. Margaret Singh's eyes widened as well. "You've brought a translator," she said in English. "We weren't informed." "My apologies," Cassandra replied. "This is Thomas Reed, our Senior Vice President of International Relations. He joined our executive team this morning specifically to ensure we could communicate with appropriate respect and clarity." Thomas bowed deeply to Nakamura, deeper than Cassandra's bow, acknowledging superior position and age. Then he spoke directly to the chairman in Japanese. Cassandra didn't understand the words, but she understood the impact. Nakamura's entire demeanor shifted, his rigid formality softening into something that looked almost like approval. The chairman responded in Japanese, a longer statement. Thomas listened with complete focus, nodded once, and replied briefly. Whatever he said made Nakamura smile. Just slightly, but definitely a smile. "What did he say?" Cassandra whispered. "He said he's surprised and pleased that we've taken this step," Thomas murmured back. "He asked about my background. I told him I spent 2 decades in diplomatic service and that I considered it an honor to facilitate understanding between our organizations. He paused. He also said the cherry blossoms in the hallway reminded him of home, and he appreciated that someone had noticed. Cassandra felt a surge of gratitude toward Thomas that was almost overwhelming. He'd taken her instructions about commenting on the decor and woven it naturally into the conversation, making it Nakamura's observation rather than her forced compliment. "Please," Margaret said, gesturing to the chairs on the opposite side of the table. "Let's sit." They arranged themselves exactly as Thomas had instructed, Marcus to Cassandra's right, Sarah to her left, James beside Sarah, Thomas standing slightly behind and between Cassandra and Marcus. The positioning put him within easy earshot, but didn't make him part of the primary negotiation team. Perfect. Business cards came out. Cassandra presented hers with both hands, bowed slightly, watched as Nakamura accepted it with the same gesture. When he handed her his card, thick paper, elegant calligraphy, probably printed by craftsmen who'd been making business cards for 100 years, she accepted it with both hands, studied it for a long moment, admiring the way his name was rendered in both Japanese characters and English script, then placed it on the table in front of her precisely as Thomas had instructed. The small talk began. Margaret asked about their drive over, commented on the rain clearing, mentioned that the hotel's restaurant served excellent tea. Cassandra engaged, asking about their flight from Tokyo, whether they'd had time to settle in, if there was anything they needed. It felt interminable, each polite exchange stretching on while Cassandra's mind screamed about contracts and deadlines and billion-dollar stakes. But she forced herself to stay present, to actually listen, to let the conversation flow naturally. Thomas occasionally interjected brief translations when Nakamura spoke in Japanese, but mostly he was silent, watchful, his presence alone seeming to reassure the other side that communication would not be a barrier today. After what felt like hours but was probably 15 minutes, Nakamura shifted in his seat, such a subtle movement that Cassandra almost missed it, but Thomas noticed. His posture changed fractionally, becoming more alert. This was it. The transition from social to business. Nakamura spoke in Japanese, a longer statement. Everyone turned to Thomas. "Chairman Nakamura says," Thomas translated, his voice taking on a formal cadence, "that he appreciates our presence here today and that he believes in giving people the opportunity to grow beyond their mistakes. He says that in his 50 years of business, he has learned that the quality of an organization is not measured by its perfection, but by its willingness to learn." Hope fluttered in Cassandra's chest, fragile as a bird's wing. Nakamura continued, and Thomas translated. "He says that our previous communications concerned him, not because of the mistakes themselves, but because they suggested a fundamental misalignment in values. He needs to know that Novosphere Global understands that this partnership is not merely a transaction, but a relationship that will span years, perhaps decades. He needs to know that we respect the traditions and approaches that have made his organization successful." This was the moment. Cassandra could feel everyone at the table holding their breath. What she said next would determine everything. She looked directly at Nakamura, letting him see the sincerity in her eyes. "Please tell Chairman Nakamura that he is absolutely right to have those concerns. In my eagerness to complete this merger quickly, I forgot that the best partnerships are not built on speed but on understanding. I forgot that respecting someone means respecting their methods, their culture, their way of doing business, not just their balance sheet." Thomas translated, his Japanese flowing smoothly. Nakamura listened, his expression unreadable. Cassandra continued, "I cannot undo my previous mistakes, but I can learn from them. That's why I asked Thomas to join our team, not just as a translator, but as a bridge, as someone who can help ensure that Novosphere never again confuses efficiency with respect, or directness with dismissiveness." As Thomas translated, she saw something shift in Nakamura's eyes. Not forgiveness, that would be presumptuous to expect, but perhaps a willingness to move forward. The chairman spoke again, and this time there was warmth in his voice that hadn't been there before. "Chairman Nakamura says," Thomas translated, "that acknowledging fault with sincerity is the first step toward wisdom. He says that many American companies have approached his organization over the years, but few have shown the humility to admit when they've taken the wrong approach. Margaret Singh leaned forward slightly, her expression thoughtful. Miss Vale, if I may ask, this is quite a significant hire to make so quickly. Thomas-san, you said you joined the executive team this morning? The question hung in the air, not accusatory, but genuinely curious. Cassandra could feel Marcus tense beside her. This could easily be interpreted as desperation, as a last-minute scramble to appear competent. Thomas responded before Cassandra could, speaking directly to Margaret in what sounded like Mandarin. She replied in the same language, her tone becoming more animated. They went back and forth for perhaps 30 seconds while everyone else at the table watched in fascination. Finally, Thomas switched back to English, a slight smile on his face. Ms. Singh was asking about my credentials, which is entirely appropriate. I've explained my background in diplomatic service and assured her that while the timing of my hiring was indeed quick, my qualifications are not in question. Thomas-san is being modest, Margaret said, now in English, though her smile suggested she was impressed. He mentioned he was present at the Shanghai Trade Summit in 2015. My father led our delegation there. It was a pivotal moment for our company's expansion. Nakamura spoke in Japanese, addressing Thomas directly. The conversation that followed was longer, more animated than anything that had come before. Cassandra watched, fascinated, as Thomas engaged with the chairman in what appeared to be a genuine discussion rather than mere translation. At one point, Nakamura actually laughed, a deep, warm sound that transformed his austere features. Chairman Nakamura remembers the summit as well, Thomas explained, turning to Cassandra. He was particularly impressed by the cultural sensitivity shown by the American delegation in their approach to intellectual property negotiations. He's asking if I was part of those specific discussions. Were you? Cassandra asked. I led them, Thomas said simply. It took 6 months of preliminary work, but we found a framework that respected both American innovation concerns and Chinese development priorities. David Singh, who'd been silent until now, spoke up in English. That framework became the foundation for several major tech partnerships. It was brilliant work. The atmosphere in the room had shifted dramatically. What had started as a tense, do-or-die meeting was becoming something else entirely. A conversation between professionals who respected each other's expertise. Cassandra realized with a start that Thomas's presence had done more than solve their translation problem. He'd brought credibility, proven experience in exactly the kind of high-stakes international negotiation they were attempting. Nakamura spoke again, and this time his tone was more serious. Thomas translated. The chairman says that he would like to discuss the specific concerns his team has raised about the merger terms. He says that with proper understanding on both sides, he believes these concerns can be addressed. This was it, the actual negotiation beginning. Cassandra felt her heart rate spike, but she kept her expression calm, present, exactly as Thomas had instructed. Margaret pulled out a tablet, swiping through what appeared to be annotated documents. Our primary concern involves the technology transfer protocols outlined in Section 7 of the proposed agreement. The language as currently written feels more appropriate for a vendor relationship than a true partnership. Sarah, the CFO, started to respond, but Cassandra touched her arm gently, stopping her. Instead, she said, "Could you help me understand what specific language creates that impression? I want to make sure I fully understand your perspective before we discuss modifications." It was a small thing, asking to understand rather than immediately defending or explaining. But she saw Margaret's posture relax fractionally, saw Nakamura nod almost imperceptibly. Thomas had been right about the power of listening. For the next hour, they worked through the agreement section by section. Sometimes the discussion happened in English, sometimes Japanese, sometimes Mandarin, with Thomas seamlessly facilitating each transition. He didn't just translate words, he translated concepts, cultural expectations, the implicit meanings beneath the explicit statements. When Sarah expressed concern about intellectual property protections, Thomas helped frame it in a way that acknowledged the Nakamura Singh Group's proven track record, while still addressing Novasphere's legal requirements. When David Singh raised questions about profit-sharing structures, Thomas explained the American tax implications that made certain arrangements more favorable, but did so in a way that didn't sound like lecturing. Cassandra found herself learning as much from watching Thomas work as from the actual negotiation content. The way he never interrupted, never rushed, always gave space for people to finish their thoughts. The way he occasionally provided cultural context that helped both sides understand why something that seemed simple was actually complex. The way he diffused potential tension with a well-placed observation or a subtle shift in phrasing. Around 12:45, Margaret called for a break. Staff appeared with tea and light refreshments, delicate pastries and fruit, nothing heavy. As people stood and stretched, Nakamura approached Thomas directly, speaking in Japanese. Thomas bowed and responded, and the two men fell into what appeared to be an animated discussion about something unrelated to business. "What are they talking about?" Marcus murmured to Cassandra. "I have no idea, but Nakamura looks happier than he has all morning," Cassandra replied. She watched as the chairman actually clasped Thomas's shoulder in a gesture of warmth, something she suspected he didn't do often with people he'd just met. When they reconvened 15 minutes later, the energy had shifted again. The formality was still there, but beneath it was something that felt almost like collaboration rather than negotiation. Nakamura spoke in Japanese, a longer statement than before. Thomas listened intently, nodding occasionally. When the chairman finished, Thomas turned to Cassandra with an expression that suggested she should pay very close attention to what came next. Chairman Nakamura says that he's been in business for 52 years. In that time, he's learned to recognize when an organization has the capacity for true partnership versus when they merely want a transaction. He says that this morning he came to this meeting prepared to politely decline the merger and move forward with other opportunities. Cassandra's stomach dropped. Prepared to decline. Past tense. Meaning what? That he'd changed his mind, or that he was confirming his original intention. Thomas continued translating. He says that what has impressed him today is not just the presence of someone who speaks his language, though he appreciates that. What has impressed him is Miss Vale's willingness to admit fault, to listen rather than argue, to recognize that different approaches to business are not better or worse, but simply different. The chairman spoke again, and now there was something in his voice that sounded almost kind. He says that in his culture there is a concept called kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold. The idea is that the object becomes more beautiful for having been broken, that the repair itself is something to be honored rather than hidden. He says that organizations like pottery can be strengthened at their broken places if they repair themselves with wisdom rather than simply trying to pretend the break never happened. Cassandra felt tears pricking at her eyes. She blinked them back, but the emotion must have shown on her face because Nakamura smiled, a genuine smile this time, warm and almost paternal. He spoke briefly in English, his accent heavy, but his meaning clear. "I think we can build something very good together, Miss Vale. If you are willing to learn, we are willing to teach. If you are willing to share, we are willing to trust." "Thank you," Cassandra managed, her voice thick. "Thank you for giving us this chance." The rest of the meeting focused on practical details, timeline adjustments, committee formations, communication protocols. It was decided that Thomas would serve as the primary liaison between the two organizations, at least initially, to ensure nothing got lost in translation literally or figuratively. By 2:30, they had the framework of an agreement. Not final, there would be weeks of legal review and refinement, but the foundation was solid. The merger would proceed. As they prepared to leave, Margaret approached Cassandra privately. "Can I speak candidly?" "Please," Cassandra said. "This morning could have gone very differently. Probably should have gone differently, given where things stood yesterday. But you did something most CEOs in your position wouldn't have done. You admitted you needed help, and you brought in someone qualified to provide it." Margaret glanced toward Thomas, who was speaking with Kenji near the windows. "More than that, you gave him real authority. You didn't just hire a translator and hide him in the corner. You made him a VP, put him at the table, let him represent your company. That took courage." "Or desperation," Cassandra said with a self-deprecating smile. "Maybe both, but here's what Chairman Nakamura will remember. When you recognized you'd made mistakes, you didn't make excuses. You changed. That's rare. Especially among successful people who've spent years being told they're brilliant." Margaret extended her hand. "I'm looking forward to this partnership, Miss Vale. I think it's going to be a good one." They shook hands, and Cassandra felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not just relief, but genuine hope. The Novosphere team gathered in the elevator afterward, and the moment the doors closed, Marcus let out a whoop that was entirely unprofessional and entirely warranted. "We did it! Holy hell, Cass, we actually did it!" "We didn't do it," Cassandra corrected, looking at Thomas. "He did it! We would have crashed and burned without him." Thomas shook his head. "No, Miss Vale. You did the hard part. You listened. You adapted. You showed them real respect. I just facilitated the conversation." "Just facilitated," Sarah repeated, laughing. "Thomas, you basically saved $1 billion deal before lunch. I think that deserves more than just facilitated." James, ever the lawyer, was more measured. "What I want to know is how someone with your credentials ended up driving cars. No offense to the profession, but that seems like a significant underutilization of talent." The elevator reached the lobby. As they walked out into the afternoon sunshine, the storm had completely cleared, leaving the city washed clean and bright. Thomas's expression became more guarded. "Life happens," he said simply. "Sometimes you make choices based on circumstances rather than preferences." "Thomas," Cassandra said, stopping in the middle of the sidewalk, forcing the others to stop too. "You mentioned yesterday that you have a daughter. That you've been telling her you're on special assignment rather than letting her know you were driving." His jaw tightened. "Yes." "How old is she?" 15. She's a sophomore at Dalton. Full scholarship, thankfully, but there are other expenses, books, activities, the things scholarships don't cover. Cassandra did the math in her head. Dalton was one of Manhattan's most prestigious private schools. Tuition alone was over $50,000 a year, and a full scholarship meant his daughter was exceptional. The other expenses he mentioned probably ran another $10,000 or $15,000 annually. For a man driving cars, that would be crushing. "What happened?" she asked gently. "To your career with the State Department?" Thomas looked at her for a long moment, clearly debating whether to answer. Finally, he said, "Budget cuts, 2017. They eliminated an entire division of diplomatic interpreters, said they'd contract the work out to save money. I was 52 years old, with credentials nobody in the private sector wanted to pay for. The corporations that needed translators wanted young kids fresh out of college who'd work cheap. The few positions that valued experience went to people with more recent connections than I had." He paused, and Cassandra saw him decide to trust her with the rest. "And then my mother got sick. Cancer, stage 4. She needed round-the-clock care that Medicare wouldn't fully cover. I spent my savings, then my retirement, then started selling things. The house in Georgetown. My father's book collection, rare first editions worth a small fortune. Everything. She died anyway, 14 months later. And by then I was so deep in debt that bankruptcy was the only option." The words were delivered without self-pity, just statement of fact. But Cassandra heard the pain beneath them, the loss that went beyond financial. "I moved to New York because Eliza, my daughter, had gotten into Dalton on scholarship. Best school she'd ever have access to. Best chance at a future better than mine. So I told her the State Department had me on special assignment in the city, took whatever work I could find that paid cash under the table while I rebuilt credit, and eventually got the driving job. It has flexible hours, which means I can be there when Eliza needs me, and it pays enough that I can cover what the scholarship doesn't." Marcus whistled low. "Man, It's not a tragedy," Thomas cut him off firmly. "It's just life. People face worse every day. I have my health, I have my daughter, and I have work that lets me support her. That's more than a lot of people have." But it wasn't enough, Cassandra thought. It wasn't anywhere near enough for someone with his gifts, his experience, his capabilities. "How much does Dalton cost?" she asked. "The full amount, including the extras." Thomas frowned. "Why does that matter?" "Because you're not driving cars anymore. You're an SVP at a Fortune 500 company, and I want to make sure the compensation package we're offering reflects both your value and your circumstances." She turned to Jennifer, who'd been hovering nearby with her tablet. "Jennifer, what's the standard SVP package?" Jennifer scrolled quickly. "Base salary of $350,000 plus performance bonuses that typically run another $100,000 to $200,000 depending on metrics. Full benefits, including healthcare, dental, vision, 401k matching up to 6%. 4 weeks vacation, executive parking, standard perks. Thomas had gone very still. That's... Miss Vale, I can't accept... You can and you will, Cassandra interrupted. Thomas, you saved my company today, potentially saved my career. The value you brought to that meeting was easily worth millions in terms of the deal we're now positioned to close. $350,000 is honestly a bargain. But I don't have... He stopped, clearly struggling. I haven't worked in an executive capacity in years. I don't know your systems, your culture, You'll learn, Marcus said, grinning. Hell, you learned enough about our crisis situation in 90 minutes to navigate one of the most important meetings in our company's history. I think you can figure out how to use our email system. Sarah nodded agreement. And honestly, Thomas, we need someone like you. Not just for this deal, but generally. We're expanding into 6 new countries over the next 3 years. Every single expansion has had cultural friction we didn't anticipate. Having someone on staff who actually understands international business culture could save us from disasters we don't even know we're walking into. Thomas looked at each of them in turn, then back to Cassandra. Why are you doing this, really? Is it guilt over what happened yesterday? Because if it is, it's not guilt, Cassandra said, though guilt was certainly part of it. It's recognition. Thomas, I've built this company by finding talented people and putting them in positions where they can excel. That's supposed to be my superpower, seeing potential others miss. And I almost missed you entirely because I was too arrogant to look past your job title. She paused. Don't let me compound that mistake by having false modesty. You're qualified. You're needed. Take the job. For a long moment, Thomas didn't respond. Then quietly he said, When do I start? You already started, Cassandra replied. Effective immediately. Jennifer, process everything today. I want Thomas's credentials, parking pass, office assignment, all of it done by end of business. Can you make that happen? Absolutely, Jennifer said, already typing furiously on her tablet. One more thing, Thomas said. I need to make a call. To my daughter. I've been lying to her for months about what I do and His voice caught. I need to tell her the truth, that her dad is back. Cassandra felt something crack open in her chest. Some wall she'd built years ago to protect herself from feeling too much. Use my car, she said. Take as long as you need. We'll get a cab back to the office. Thomas nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and walked toward where the Mercedes was parked up the block. Cassandra watched him go. This man she'd insulted 24 hours ago. This man who'd just saved everything she'd built. This man who'd been willing to sacrifice his pride for his daughter's future. That was a good thing you did, Marcus said quietly beside her. I didn't do anything good, Cassandra replied. I just finally stopped doing something terrible. There's a difference. They stood there on the sidewalk, watching the city move around them, taxis honking, pedestrians rushing past, the eternal motion of Manhattan. Cassandra's phone was buzzing constantly with congratulatory messages from board members who'd somehow already heard the meeting went well. Her schedule for the rest of the day was probably chaos. There were a million things demanding her attention. None of them seemed important right now. Up the block, through the Mercedes' windshield, she could see Thomas on the phone. Even from a distance, she could see his shoulders shaking, one hand covering his face. He was crying, she realized, telling his daughter that the lie was over, that things were going to be okay. Come on, Sarah said gently. Let's give him privacy. We can walk back to the office. It's a nice day. They started walking, leaving Thomas to his moment. But as they turned the corner onto Madison Avenue, Cassandra looked back one more time. Thomas was still on the phone, but now he was smiling through his tears, nodding at something his daughter was saying. She'd done that. Her decision, her willingness to see past her own assumptions, had given him his life back. It didn't erase the cruelty of what she'd said yesterday. It didn't make her a good person. But maybe it was a start. The walk back to Novasphere headquarters took 20 minutes. They didn't talk much, each lost in their own thoughts about the morning's events. When they finally reached the building, the lobby seemed different somehow, brighter, more welcoming. Or maybe Cassandra was just seeing it differently. In the elevator, Marcus turned to her. So what happens now? With the merger, I mean. We've got framework agreement, but there's still months of work ahead. Now we do it right, Cassandra said. We bring Thomas in on every discussion, every decision that touches the international side. We make sure we're not just checking cultural boxes, but actually building a relationship with Nakamura Singh, and we learn. We actually learn instead of just assuming we know best. Well, that's going to be a significant culture shift for this company, James observed. We've always operated with a pretty aggressive, American-first mindset. Then maybe it's time we grew up, Cassandra replied. Her office, when she reached it, felt different too. The view was the same, Manhattan spreading out in every direction, a kingdom she'd helped build. But the throne she'd been sitting on felt less secure, less important, or maybe just less isolating. Jennifer appeared in the doorway. Miss Vale, I have Thomas's paperwork ready, and I've assigned him the corner office on 46, the one that's been vacant since Henderson retired. Is that acceptable? Perfect. What else? The board wants a full debrief on the meeting by end of day. Communications needs a statement for the press release, and you have about 37 emails from people who heard things went well and want to congratulate you. Jennifer paused. Also, there's someone here to see you. She says she's Thomas's daughter. Cassandra's head snapped up. What? She's in the lobby. Security called up. Apparently Thomas texted her your office address and told her to come by after school. She says she wanted to see where her father works now. A 15-year-old girl coming to see proof that her father's life had changed. Coming to verify that the good news was real. Send her up, Cassandra said. I'll meet her in the executive lounge, not my office. And Jennifer, bring some of those good cookies from the break room. And hot chocolate if we have it. On it, Jennifer said, already moving. 10 minutes later, Cassandra stood in the executive lounge, a space usually reserved for board meetings and high-level client entertaining, waiting to meet Eliza Reed. She'd spent the intervening time trying to figure out what to say, how to explain her role in both her father's suffering and his salvation. She'd come up with nothing that felt adequate. The elevator dinged. A young girl stepped out, and Cassandra's breath caught. Eliza Reed was beautiful in the way that teenage girls sometimes are, all potential and promise, not yet grown into her features, but showing hints of the woman she'd become. She wore a Dalton uniform, carried a backpack covered in book club stickers and social justice pins, and had her father's eyes, dark, intelligent, taking in everything. Those eyes fixed on Cassandra with an intensity that was unnerving. Miss Vale? Eliza's voice was clear, confident. I'm Eliza Reed, Thomas Reed's daughter. Please call me Cassandra. She gestured to the seating area where Jennifer had arranged cookies and steaming mugs on a coffee table. Thank you for coming. I hope it wasn't too far out of your way. I took the subway from school. It's fine. Eliza sat down but didn't touch the cookies, despite being a teenager who probably hadn't eaten since lunch. My dad called me 3 hours ago. He was crying. My dad never cries. The accusation in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. Whatever you did to make my father cry, it said, you'll answer to me for it. He told me everything, Eliza continued, about losing his job, about Grandma's cancer, about driving cars and lying to me about it. Her voice cracked slightly. About you giving him a real job again. Cassandra sat down across from her, feeling like she was being judged by someone far older than 15. Your father is a remarkable man, Eliza. What he did today, what he's been doing for you, takes a kind of courage most people never find. He shouldn't have had to, Eliza said fiercely. He spent his whole life serving this country, helping negotiate deals that helped millions of people, and when budget cuts came, they threw him away like garbage. And then people like you... She stopped, took a breath. I'm sorry, that was rude. He told me to be polite. No, Cassandra said. You're right. People like me, people who've been so focused on building empires that we forgot to see the human beings around us, who treated your father like he was invisible because his job title didn't match his credentials. She leaned forward. Eliza, I'm not going to pretend I'm some kind of hero. The truth is, I was horrible to your father. Yesterday I said something to him that I'm deeply ashamed of. And if circumstances hadn't forced me to recognize how badly I needed his help, I might never have looked past my own arrogance to see who he really was. Eliza studied her silently. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. He said you'd probably tell me the truth instead of trying to make yourself look good. He said that's why he's willing to work for you, because you owned your mistakes. He's giving me more credit than I deserve. Maybe. Or maybe he sees something in you that you don't see in yourself yet. Eliza reached for a cookie finally, nibbling it thoughtfully. My dad is the smartest person I know. Not just language smart, but people smart. He can read a room better than anyone. So if he thinks you're worth working for, worth trusting, then I'll trust his judgment. The conditional acceptance in those words was clear. I'll trust you because my father does, but don't make him regret it. I'll do my best to earn that trust, Cassandra said. They talked for another 20 minutes about Dalton, about Eliza's plans to study international relations in college, about her debate team and her volunteer work teaching English to recent immigrants. The girl was brilliant, passionate, exactly the kind of young person who'd change the world if given the chance. When Thomas finally arrived, having clearly composed himself and changed from the borrowed suit back into more casual clothes someone had found for him, his eyes went immediately to his daughter. Eliza, what are you doing here? I told you I'd be home by 6. Dad, I needed to see it, to see that it was real. Eliza stood and hugged him fiercely. That you weren't just saying things to make me feel better like you always do. Thomas held his daughter like she was the most precious thing in the world, which to him she obviously was. It's real, sweetheart, I promise. Watching them, Cassandra felt something shift inside her. This was what mattered. Not corner offices or Forbes covers or board meetings. This, a father and daughter reunited with dignity and hope after months of struggle. She'd spent 20 years building a company, measuring success in stock prices and market share and revenue growth, and she'd been successful by those measures. Wildly successful. But she'd also been empty. Standing there in the executive lounge, watching Thomas Reed embrace his daughter, Cassandra Vale finally understood what she'd lost in her climb to the top, and she began tentatively to imagine what it might be like to find it again. The following Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made Manhattan feel like the center of the universe. Cassandra stood at her office window watching the sunrise paint the buildings gold and realized she'd actually slept through the night for the first time in months. No anxiety dreams about collapsing deals. No waking at 3 a.m. to check international markets. Just sleep, deep and dreamless. Her phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. First day jitters are real. Is it too late to go back to driving? She smiled and typed back, way too late. Your office is already set up. Jennifer may have gone overboard with the welcome basket. Define overboard. There's champagne, and possibly a fruit arrangement shaped like the globe. I'm terrified and touched in equal measure. The exchange was easy, casual in a way that surprised her. A week ago, she wouldn't have known Thomas Reed's name. Now he was texting her jokes at 6:47 in the morning, and it felt natural. She arrived at the office at 7:30 to find the executive floor already buzzing with unusual energy. Staff members kept glancing toward the corner office on 46, whispering. The rumor mill had been working overtime all weekend, spinning stories about the mysterious new SVP who'd apparently materialized out of nowhere and saved the Nakamura Singh deal. Jennifer intercepted her at the elevator with coffee and a tablet full of schedule updates. Morning, Miss Vale. Thomas arrived at 6:45. He's been in his office reading through company files and asking very smart questions about our international protocol history, or lack thereof. Has anyone given him trouble about the quick promotion? Not to his face, but there's definitely buzz. The CFO team is skeptical. Legal is reserving judgment. And I heard 2 VPs in marketing speculating that he must have blackmail material on you. Jennifer's expression was carefully neutral, but Cassandra caught the disapproval in her voice. Let them speculate, Cassandra said. Thomas's credentials speak for themselves. Anyone who has a problem can make an appointment to discuss it with me directly. She made her way to Thomas's new office, knocked once, and entered without waiting for permission. A power move she immediately regretted when she saw him jump slightly in his chair. Sorry, she said. Old habits. I should have waited. It's your company, Thomas replied, but there was warmth in his eyes that suggested he appreciated the apology. Come in. I was just trying to figure out this phone system. I think I accidentally put myself on Do Not Disturb permanently. His office was indeed covered in Jennifer's welcome enthusiasm. The fruit globe, the champagne, a plant that looked like it required a PhD in botany to maintain, and a framed photo someone had clearly pulled from the State Department archives showing a much younger Thomas standing with 3 presidents and a Secretary of State. "Where did she even find that?" Thomas asked, gesturing at the photo. "Jennifer is terrifyingly thorough. I've learned not to question her methods." Cassandra sat in one of the visitor chairs, noting how Thomas had already personalized the space with a few items. A battered leather briefcase that looked older than Eliza, a coffee mug with "World's Okayest Dad" printed on it, and a small framed photo of his daughter at what looked like a debate competition, mid-argument, fierce and brilliant. "How are you feeling?" Cassandra asked. "Really?" Thomas leaned back in his chair, considering the question seriously. "Honestly, terrified, grateful, suspicious that I'm going to wake up and find this was all a stress-induced hallucination." He paused. "And guilty." "Guilty? There are thousands of people in this city with my qualifications, or better, who are driving Ubers, working retail, taking whatever jobs they can find because the economy decided their expertise wasn't valuable anymore. Why do I get to be here when they don't?" The question hung in the air, uncomfortable and honest. Cassandra had no good answer because he was right. Luck, timing, her desperate need, none of it was fair. "I don't know," she admitted. "But maybe instead of feeling guilty, you can use this position to help change the systems that made it necessary in the first place. We have influence now. Together. We could make Novosphere the kind of company that doesn't just talk about valuing experience. We could actually prove it." Something shifted in Thomas's expression, skepticism giving way to cautious hope. "You're serious?" "I'm serious. Thomas, I've spent the last 3 days thinking about everything that led to last Thursday. The assumptions I made, the people I didn't see, and I realized my company, my supposedly progressive, innovative, forward-thinking company, has the same blind spots I do. We hire kids fresh out of Ivy League schools and pay them 6 figures, but we won't look twice at someone over 50 no matter what their resume says. We talk about diversity, but we mean skin color and gender, not actual diversity of experience or perspective. That's pretty much every major corporation in America," Thomas observed, "which means there's a massive competitive advantage available to whoever figures it out first." Cassandra leaned forward, the idea crystallizing as she spoke. "What if we created a program specifically designed to identify and hire people like you? People with decades of expertise who've been sidelined by circumstances. We could call it, I don't know, we'd workshop the name, but imagine the talent pool we'd be accessing, the institutional knowledge, the perspectives that come from actually living through economic shifts instead of just studying them in business school." Thomas was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he said, "You'd face pushback. Age discrimination lawsuits from younger candidates who get passed over. Concerns about healthcare costs for older workers. Questions about whether people who've been out of corporate environments can adapt to new systems and technologies." "All solvable problems," Cassandra countered. "And frankly, given what you accomplished last Thursday with 0 preparation time, I'm not worried about adaptability. I'm more worried about continuing to overlook talent because it doesn't come in the package we expect." "I'd want to help design it," Thomas said. "The program. If you're serious about this." "I'm absolutely serious, and I absolutely want your input." She stood. "But first we have to get through today, which includes introducing you to the broader executive team at the 9 a.m. meeting. Fair warning, some of them are going to be skeptical. Because I went from driver to VP in 48 hours? That, and because change makes people nervous, especially successful people who've built their careers on specific ways of doing things." Thomas stood as well, straightening his tie, a subtle navy blue that Jennifer had probably selected from the company wardrobe closet. "I've faced down hostile delegations from countries that wanted to declare war on each other. I think I can handle some skeptical VPs." "That's the spirit," Cassandra said. Then, more seriously, "Thomas, if anyone gives you grief, real grief, not just professional skepticism, you come to me immediately. You're here because you're qualified, not because you're a token diversity hire or a sympathy case. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." He met her eyes, and she saw a flash of the man who'd negotiated peace treaties, who'd refused to be diminished by circumstances beyond his control. "I won't, but I appreciate you saying it." The 9 a.m. executive meeting was held in the main conference room on 47, a space designed to intimidate with its massive table, leather chairs, and wall-mounted screens showing real-time data from Novasphere's global operations. Cassandra arrived deliberately early with Thomas, wanting to control the room setup and first impressions. Marcus was already there, along with Sarah and James. They greeted Thomas warmly, the bond from Thursday's crisis creating an instant alliance. But as other executives filtered in, the energy shifted. David Rosenberg from marketing entered first, his expression polite but guarded. Catherine Liu from product development followed, offering Thomas a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then Robert Morrison from operations, who didn't bother hiding his skepticism as he took in Thomas's presence at the executive table. "Everyone," Cassandra said once the room had filled, 14 VPs and senior directors, the core leadership that made Novasphere function. "I want to formally introduce Thomas Reed, our new Senior Vice President of International Relations. Most of you have heard about the Nakamura-Singh meeting last Thursday. Thomas was instrumental in securing that deal, and he brings expertise we desperately need as we expand globally." "Quite a jump from the motor pool to the C-suite," Robert said, his tone just sharp enough to sting without being overtly insubordinate. "Must be some kind of record." The room went quiet, everyone waiting to see how Cassandra would respond, how Thomas would respond, whether this was going to be a battle or a coronation. Thomas spoke before Cassandra could, his voice calm and professional. "You're right, Mr. Morrison. It is unusual, and I understand your skepticism. But for context, I spent 22 years as a State Department interpreter, facilitating negotiations for 3 administrations. I have master's degrees from Harvard and Georgetown. I speak 9 languages fluently and have professional proficiency in 4 more. I lost my position due to budget cuts, not performance issues, and took whatever work was available while rebuilding financial stability." He paused, letting the credentials sink in. Several executives shifted in their seats, recalculating. "I'm not here because Miss Vale felt sorry for me," Thomas continued. "I'm here because this company is expanding into markets that require cultural expertise it doesn't currently possess. I'm here because last Thursday, a billion-dollar deal was hours from collapse due to protocol violations that no one on staff recognized as violations. I'm here because I can prevent that from happening again." His eyes swept the room, meeting each person's gaze steadily. "But if anyone has concerns about my qualifications or my ability to contribute at this level, I'm happy to discuss them directly. I'd rather address doubt now than let it fester into resentment later." The silence that followed was different, thoughtful rather than hostile. Catherine Liu spoke first. "What languages do you speak?" "Fluent in English, Spanish, French, Japanese, Mandarin, Cantonese, Hindi, Arabic, and Russian. Professional working proficiency in German, Korean, Portuguese, and Italian." 13 languages, Catherine repeated, looking impressed despite herself. "And you said you were at State for 22 years. What kind of negotiations?" For the next 15 minutes, Thomas fielded questions about his background, his experience, his approach to cultural mediation. He was neither defensive nor arrogant, simply factual. When David Rosenberg asked about his familiarity with tech industry culture, Thomas admitted he'd have a learning curve, but noted that understanding people was ultimately more important than understanding products. You could learn the latter, but the former was instinctive. By the time they moved on to the actual meeting agenda, the energy had shifted. Not everyone was convinced, Robert Morrison still looked skeptical, and a few others were clearly reserving judgment, but the open hostility had dissipated. The meeting itself focused on quarterly projections and the integration timeline for Nakamura-Singh. When discussion turned to the cultural liaison protocols that would be needed, Thomas contributed observations that were specific, practical, and demonstrated deep understanding of both business operations and international relationship dynamics. "The key thing to remember," he said at one point, "is that different cultures have different communication styles and decision-making processes. In American business, we value speed and directness. In Japanese business culture, decisions are made through consensus building that looks slow to us, but actually creates stronger buy-in and smoother implementation." If we try to rush Nakamura Singh through our standard processes, we'll create friction. If we adapt our timeline to accommodate their approach, we'll build trust that pays dividends for years. But we have investor expectations, Robert countered. Quarterly earnings calls where we have to show progress. We can't just tell Wall Street to be patient while we drink tea and build consensus. You can if you frame it correctly, Thomas replied. Instead of, we're moving slowly, the message is, we're building a partnership that will deliver sustained value rather than quick wins that don't last. Investors understand long-term strategy if you give them the right narrative. Sarah, the CFO, nodded slowly. That's actually brilliant. We've been so focused on hitting integration milestones that we haven't thought about the story we're telling about those milestones. The meeting continued for another hour, covering everything from the Mumbai office expansion to potential partnerships in South America. Thomas contributed when his expertise was relevant and listened carefully when it wasn't, taking notes in a leather journal that looked like it had survived multiple continents. As people filed out afterward, Marcus pulled Cassandra aside. Okay, I admit it, I had doubts, but that guy is the real deal. Did you hear him diffuse Morrison's concerns without making it a confrontation? That's executive-level political skill. I told you he was qualified, Cassandra replied, but she felt relieved. She'd been more nervous about this meeting than she'd admitted, worried that her gamble on Thomas would blow up in both their faces. Thomas emerged last, looking drained but satisfied. How'd I do? Scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being you're fired, and 10 being you've successfully fooled everyone into thinking you belong here. Solid 8, Cassandra said. Morrison's still skeptical, but that's Morrison's default setting for everyone. Most importantly, you established credibility. People will give you a chance now. That's all I can ask for. He checked his watch. I have a meeting with the IT department to set up my systems, then a call with Margaret Singh at 2 to discuss communication protocols going forward. After that, I need to review the files on our Latin America expansion plans. I saw some red flags in the Brazil approach that I want to research before raising concerns. You found red flags in your first 4 hours on the job? It jumped out when Catherine mentioned our strategy for Sao Paulo. We're approaching it like we're dealing with Spain, but Brazilian business culture is actually quite different from Spanish or even other Latin American countries. If we're not careful, we'll repeat the same mistakes we made with Nakamura Singh. Cassandra felt a surge of vindication. This was exactly why hiring Thomas had been the right call. Not just for the crisis he'd already solved, but for all the crises he was going to help them avoid. Flag anything you see, she said. I'd rather overcorrect right now than miss something important. The day accelerated from there. Cassandra had back-to-back meetings. Investors who wanted reassurance about the Nakamura Singh timeline, board members who wanted details on the new hire, department heads who needed decisions on a dozen different initiatives. Between meetings, she fielded a constant stream of emails and calls, each one demanding pieces of her attention. By 4 p.m., she was exhausted. But she'd also noticed something unusual. She felt energized in a way she hadn't in years. Not the frantic, anxiety-driven energy of crisis management, but genuine engagement. She was building something that mattered beyond stock prices. Her assistant knocked on her open door. Miss Vale, you have a visitor. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important. Who is it? A woman named Patricia Coleman. She says she used to work here and she needs 5 minutes of your time. The name rang a bell, but Cassandra couldn't place it. Did she say what this is about? No, just that it's important. She's been waiting in the lobby for 2 hours. Something about that, the patience, the determination, made Cassandra curious. Send her up. 5 minutes later, a woman in her mid-50s entered Cassandra's office. She was dressed professionally but not expensively, carried herself with quiet dignity, and had eyes that suggested she'd seen hardship and survived it. Miss Vale, thank you for seeing me. I know you're busy. Patricia Coleman sat in the visitor chair without waiting for invitation, which suggested either nervousness or determination. I worked here 7 years ago. Executive assistant to David Rosenberg in marketing. I was with the company for 12 years total. Cassandra pulled up personnel files on her computer. I see your record here. You left in 2018. Resignation, not termination. That's what the paperwork says. The reality is I was pushed out. Patricia's voice was steady, factual. I was 51 years old. I'd been an excellent assistant for over a decade, 3 consecutive years of outstanding performance reviews. Then Rosenberg hired a new associate who was 26 and wanted her own assistant. Someone younger, someone who fit the energy of the team better. But those were the actual words used. That's age discrimination, Cassandra said. Why didn't you file a complaint? I did. Internal HR said there was no proof of discrimination, that it was just a restructuring decision. I was offered a severance package contingent on signing a non-disclosure agreement. I was told if I pursued legal action, the company would fight it and I'd never work in corporate America again. Patricia's hands were clasped tightly in her lap. I had a daughter in college, Miss Vale. I couldn't afford years of legal battles, so I signed the papers, took the severance, and left. Cassandra felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd been CEO during this. She'd signed off on policy that allowed this to happen. Where are you working now? Administrative support at a nonprofit. It pays about 40% of what I made here, and there's no room for advancement. Most of my former colleagues are in similar situations. We're all skilled, experienced professionals who got aged out of corporate positions and can't get back in. Why are you telling me this? Patricia met her eyes directly. Because I heard about Thomas Reed. About you hiring a former State Department interpreter who'd been driving cars. About you giving him an executive position based on his actual qualifications rather than his recent job history. And I thought, her voice wavered slightly, I thought maybe you'd become the kind of CEO who sees people instead of just resumes. The words hit harder than any board critique ever had. Cassandra sat back in her chair, looking at this woman who'd been discarded by her company, by her industry, by a system that valued youth over experience and new over proven. Tell me about your skills, Cassandra said. What you're good at, what you want to do. I'm an exceptional executive assistant. I can manage complex schedules, anticipate needs before they're articulated, handle sensitive communications with discretion. I'm fluent in Spanish and Portuguese. I have extensive experience with international clients and cross-cultural business etiquette, and I'm excellent at training and mentoring junior staff, back when companies bothered with that instead of just expecting people to figure everything out on their own. Why executive assistant work? Why not move into management? Patricia smiled slightly. Because I'm genuinely good at it. I like being the person who makes sure everything runs smoothly, who knows where all the pieces are and how they fit together. Not everyone wants to be the face of the operation. Some of us prefer being the backbone. Cassandra made a decision. Jennifer is overwhelmed. She's been managing not just my schedule, but coordinating with our international partners, handling sensitive communications, training new administrative staff. We need another senior EA, someone who can take on the international coordination piece specifically. It would require working closely with Thomas Reed to ensure all cultural protocols are followed, all communications are properly managed. 6-month probation period, standard for executive staff. But if it works out, it's a permanent position with full benefits and salary commensurate with your experience. Patricia stared at her. You're offering me a job, just like that. Not just like that. You're qualified. You have skills we need. The only reason you weren't considered before is because of systemic bias that I'm committed to changing. Cassandra leaned forward. But I need to be honest with you. This isn't charity. I expect excellence. You'll be evaluated on your performance, not given special treatment because of past injustice. Can you handle that? Miss Vale, I've been proving myself my entire career. Another chance to do it is all I'm asking for. Then welcome back to Novosphere, Cassandra buzzed Jennifer. Can you come in here? I need you to start onboarding paperwork for a new senior executive assistant position. When Jennifer arrived and saw Patricia, recognition flashed across her face, followed by something that looked like relief. Miss Coleman, I didn't know you were meeting with Miss Vale. You two know each other? Cassandra asked. Patricia trained me when I started here, Jennifer said. She's the reason I'm any good at this job. Everything I know about executive-level administration, I learned from her. The pieces clicked into place. Jennifer had been advocating for months about needing additional support, specifically someone with international experience. She'd probably been thinking of Patricia, but knew better than to suggest rehiring someone who'd been forced out. Well, you're about to work together again, Cassandra said. Patricia, Jennifer will get you set up. I want you to start Monday if possible. Jennifer, brief her on everything, systems, protocols, current projects, especially everything related to the Nakamura Singh integration. After Patricia left, looking dazed but determined, Jennifer lingered in the doorway. Miss Vale, what's happening? What do you mean? You hired Thomas Reed out of nowhere. Now you're bringing back Patricia Coleman. You've been different since last week. Less, she searched for the word, less harsh, I guess, more present. What changed? Cassandra considered deflecting, but Jennifer had earned honesty. I saw myself clearly for the first time in a long time, and I didn't like what I saw. So I'm trying to do better. It's not just you, Jennifer said quietly. The whole culture here it's very sink or swim. Very much prove yourself constantly or you're out. A lot of good people have been lost because they didn't fit some narrow definition of what success looks like. I know, and we're going to change that. But it's going to take time and sustained effort. Think you can handle being part of that change? Jennifer smiled, genuine, warm, the first completely unguarded expression Cassandra had seen from her in 3 years. I thought you'd never ask. The rest of the week unfolded in a blur of activity. Thomas settled into his role with remarkable speed, identifying potential cultural friction points in ongoing negotiations and proposing solutions that were both practical and respectful. Patricia started on Monday and within 2 days had reorganized the entire executive administrative structure, creating efficiencies that Jennifer said she couldn't believe they'd ever functioned without. But the real test came Thursday afternoon, when Marcus appeared in Cassandra's office looking grim. We have a situation, Mumbai office. There's been a cyber breach. Someone got into our customer database. Local team is panicking, and we have clients demanding answers in 3 different languages. I've got IT working on the technical side, but we need someone who can communicate with our Indian partners, our Chinese manufacturing contacts, and our Australian distribution network simultaneously. And we need it now. Cassandra didn't hesitate. Get Thomas. 10 minutes later, Thomas was in the crisis command center Marcus had set up. A conference room with screens showing system data, video feeds from the Mumbai office, and messaging channels exploding with increasingly frantic communications. Talk to me, Thomas said, his voice cutting through the chaos with calm authority. What exactly happened? The IT director, a young woman named Priya who looked like she might cry, explained, ransomware attack. They encrypted our customer database for the Mumbai region and are demanding payment. But it's not just about the ransom. We have contractual obligations to inform all affected parties within specific timeframes, and some of those contracts are in languages our legal team can't read quickly enough to verify terms. Show me the contracts, Thomas said, pulling up a chair at the main console. For the next 3 hours, Cassandra watched Thomas work. He spoke to the Mumbai team in Hindi, calming their panic and getting clear information about what systems were affected. He read through Chinese manufacturing contracts, identifying exactly what notification requirements existed and drafting communications that satisfied legal obligations while maintaining business relationships. He video conferenced with Australian partners in English, explaining the situation with a transparency that actually increased their confidence rather than damaging it. At one point, he was literally on 3 different calls simultaneously, English in one ear, Mandarin in the other, reading a Hindi document on the screen in front of him. Cassandra heard him switch between languages mid-sentence, his brain apparently capable of processing multiple linguistic frameworks without confusion. How is he doing that? Marcus whispered, standing beside Cassandra as they watched through the command center window. Practice. Talent. Probably some neurological wiring the rest of us don't have, Cassandra replied. This is what 22 years at State Department looks like. This is expertise we almost threw away. By 7 p.m., the immediate crisis was contained. The ransomware was being addressed by IT and cybersecurity specialists. All contractual notification requirements had been met in appropriate languages. Client relationships were not just preserved, but potentially strengthened by the transparency and competence of the response. Thomas emerged from the command center looking exhausted but satisfied. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, and there was a coffee stain on his shirt that suggested someone had handed him a cup without him noticing. "Nice work," Cassandra said. "You just saved us from what could have been a catastrophic loss of client trust." "I just did my job," Thomas replied. But she could see the pride in his eyes. Not arrogance, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing he'd contributed something valuable. "Come on," Marcus said, clapping Thomas on the shoulder. "Crisis management tradition says we order pizza and overpriced beer on the company card. You've earned it." They ended up in Marcus's office. Cassandra, Marcus, Thomas, Sarah, and James, eating pizza from boxes spread across the conference table and drinking beer from bottles that Sarah had apparently kept hidden in her office mini-fridge for exactly these occasions. "To Thomas," Sarah said, raising her bottle, "for proving that sometimes the best hiring decisions are the ones that look crazy on paper." They drank to that, and the conversation drifted into the easy camaraderie that came from surviving crisis together. James told stories about his worst legal emergencies. Marcus described the time a product launch went so wrong they'd had to recall every unit. Sarah shared horror stories from her early days as an accountant. When it was Thomas's turn, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, 2012, I was in Geneva, interpreting for trade talks between the US and Russia. Tensions were incredibly high. This was right after the whole Magnitsky Act situation. I'm in the room with people who fundamentally distrust each other, translating not just words but intentions, trying to find common ground where none seems to exist. He paused, taking a sip of beer. 3 days in, I made a mistake. I mistranslated a phrase, just slightly, but enough that the Russian delegation thought the Americans were questioning their integrity. The whole negotiation almost collapsed. I had to go to both sides separately, admit my error, explain what I'd actually meant versus what I'd said. It was humiliating. I thought my career was over. "What happened?" Cassandra asked. Both sides respected that I owned the mistake immediately instead of trying to hide it or blame someone else. They agreed to continue the talks, and I learned that admitting fault with humility is often more powerful than never making mistakes at all. He looked at Cassandra. "Sound familiar?" She smiled, understanding the parallel. "Very familiar." "The point is," Thomas continued, "everyone in this room has screwed up at some point. Everyone has had moments where they weren't sure they belonged, where they worried they'd be exposed as frauds. The difference between people who succeed and people who don't isn't perfection. It's willingness to learn, to adapt, to recognize when you need help, and actually ask for it." The words settled over the room like a benediction. These were all people who'd spent years projecting confidence they didn't always feel, maintaining facades of competence, even when drowning in doubt. Thomas's honesty gave them permission to acknowledge their own vulnerabilities. "I need to ask you something," Cassandra said, emboldened by beer and the intimacy of the moment. "That day you were driving me. When I said what I said, why didn't you quit on the spot? You could have, should have, honestly. Why stay?" Thomas considered the question seriously. "Pride, partly. I wasn't going to let you take my daughter's education away from me, but also," he hesitated, "I've been on the receiving end of enough cruelty in my life to recognize when it's coming from genuine malice versus when it's coming from pain. You were vicious that day, but you weren't evil. You were drowning and lashing out at whoever was nearby. It didn't make it okay, but it made it understandable." "That's generous," Cassandra said. "It's honest. And honestly, I'm grateful you needed help when you did. Another few months of driving, and I might have given up entirely, let myself believe that's all I was worth. You gave me back my dignity, even if the path there was brutal." They talked until nearly 10, when exhaustion finally drove them all toward home. As they packed up leftover pizza and collected empty bottles, Sarah pulled Cassandra aside. "You know word is spreading, right? About the changes you're making, the culture shift. I've had 3 people in my department ask if it's true that we're actively recruiting experienced professionals who've been sidelined by age discrimination." "What did you tell them?" "That we're exploring it. But Cass, if you're serious about this, it needs to be official policy, not just ad hoc decisions. We need structure, guidelines, buy-in from HR and legal. Otherwise, it looks like favoritism, and the whole thing backfires." She was right, of course. Good intentions weren't enough. Real change required systems, accountability, sustained commitment. Set up a meeting for next week, Cassandra said. You, me, Thomas, the head of HR, and whoever from legal handles employment policy. We're going to design this properly. Sarah nodded, satisfied. Good, because if we actually pull this off, if Novasphere becomes known as the company that values experience and gives second chances, the talent we could attract would be insane. Every major corporation has been bleeding experienced workers for years. We could scoop up the best of them. That's the goal, Cassandra agreed. Competitive advantage through basic human decency. Revolutionary concept. Walking out to her car that night, not the Mercedes, which Thomas had driven home, but a Tesla from the executive garage, Cassandra found herself thinking about the last 10 days. How quickly everything had changed, how close she'd come to missing it entirely. Her phone buzzed with a text from Eliza. Dad came home tonight literally beaming. Thank you for giving him back to himself. Cassandra felt tears sting her eyes. She typed back, he did that himself. I just got out of his way. Still, you could have stayed in his way. Most people would have. So thank you. The drive home took 40 minutes through Manhattan traffic that never seemed to sleep. Cassandra spent it thinking about trajectory, about the paths our lives take, based on tiny moments and small decisions. If she hadn't needed an interpreter that Thursday, if Thomas hadn't been her driver, if she'd been just slightly less desperate or slightly more stubborn, everything would be different. Maybe that was the real lesson. Not that she'd heroically saved Thomas Reed, but that she'd been saved from herself. That sometimes the people we dismiss, the people we overlook, the people we hurt, sometimes they're the ones who end up saving us, if we're humble enough to let them. Her apartment was dark when she arrived, which used to feel lonely, but now felt peaceful. She poured a glass of wine, stood at her windows overlooking Central Park, and allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the grasping, anxious hope of ambition, not the desperate hope of crisis averted, but genuine, grounded hope that maybe, just maybe, she was finally building something that mattered beyond quarterly earnings and stock prices. Something that would last. Something human. Something real. 3 months later, Cassandra sat in the St. Regis Hotel's grand ballroom watching Chairman Nakamura sign the final merger documents. The room was filled with executives from both companies, lawyers with briefcases full of contracts, photographers capturing the moment for press releases that would hit the wire within the hour. But despite the crowd and the cameras and the magnitude of what was happening, Cassandra felt strangely calm. Thomas stood beside her, translating the chairman's remarks in real time. Over the past 12 weeks, he'd become indispensable, not just to this deal, but to every aspect of Novasphere's international operations. The Mumbai crisis had been just the beginning. He'd negotiated a partnership with a Brazilian manufacturing firm that everyone else had written off as too difficult. He'd identified a cultural miscommunication in their Australian contracts that would have cost millions in penalties. He'd trained the entire executive team on international business protocols, turning what could have been a tedious seminar into something people actually looked forward to attending. But more than his professional contributions, Thomas had changed the culture. His presence, the story of how he'd been hired, why he'd been hired, had sparked a conversation that was still reverberating through the company. People were questioning assumptions they'd held for years, examining biases they hadn't known they had, reconsidering candidates they would have previously dismissed. The Second Chance Initiative, as they'd eventually named it, had officially launched 6 weeks ago. The program actively recruited experienced professionals over 50 who'd been displaced by economic shifts, corporate restructuring, or simple age discrimination. In the first month alone, they'd hired 17 people. A former NASA engineer now leading their satellite communications division, a retired diplomat managing South American relations, a once prominent architect redesigning their office spaces with accessibility and sustainability in mind. Not every hire had worked out perfectly. 2 candidates had struggled with the technology learning curve more than anticipated. One had ultimately decided retirement was preferable to corporate life, but the successes far outweighed the setbacks, and the talent pool they were accessing was extraordinary. The media attention had been intense. Forbes ran a cover story. Novasphere's radical hiring strategy, why experience beats youth. The Wall Street Journal published an op-ed by Cassandra about systemic age discrimination and the competitive advantage of diversity that actually meant something. Harvard Business Review requested a case study. Other companies were starting to inquire about their model, their approach, their results. But the moment that had mattered most to Cassandra hadn't been any press coverage. It had been 2 weeks ago when Patricia Coleman had knocked on her door with tears streaming down her face. "I just got an email from my daughter," Patricia had said, her voice shaking. "She's graduating college next month, and she wrote to say that having me back in a job I love, having me come home excited about work instead of exhausted and defeated, she said it taught her more about resilience and self-worth than anything she learned in her classes. She said, I'm her hero." Cassandra had come around the desk to hug her, both of them crying, both of them understanding that this was what success actually looked like. Not stock prices or merger announcements, but a daughter who got her mother back, a woman who got her dignity restored. Now, watching Nakamura-san place his seal on the final page of the merger agreement, a traditional Japanese seal in red ink, beautiful and formal, Cassandra felt the weight of the past 3 months settle into something solid and real. They'd done it. Not just saved the deal, but transformed it into something better than it would have been. Margaret Singh approached as the signing ceremony concluded, her smile genuine. "Miss Vale, I wanted to say congratulations, and thank you. This partnership is stronger than anything we initially envisioned." "Thomas deserves the credit," Cassandra said. "He built the bridge we're all crossing." "He facilitated," Margaret corrected gently, "but you had the humility to recognize you needed the bridge in the first place. In my experience, that's the harder skill to find." She paused. "My father asked me to extend an invitation. He's hosting a private dinner tonight for the key stakeholders. He specifically requested that you and Thomas attend. And Thomas's daughter, if she's available. Father wants to meet the young woman who inspired such dedication." Cassandra felt her throat tighten. In traditional Japanese culture, meeting someone's family was significant. It suggested respect that went beyond business. "We'd be honored." The dinner that evening was held in a private room at Masa, a restaurant Cassandra had heard about but never visited because the prices were astronomical even by Manhattan standards. The space was intimate, elegant, designed for the kind of conversations that mattered. Chairman Nakamura greeted them at the entrance with a bow that was deeper than protocol required, a gesture of personal respect rather than formal courtesy. When Eliza entered, nervous but poised in a navy dress she and Thomas had apparently spent an entire weekend shopping for, the chairman's face softened into something approaching grandfatherly affection. "Reed-san," he said in careful English, addressing Thomas. "Your daughter has your eyes. Also, I think your intelligence." Thomas translated for Eliza, whose Japanese was limited to basic phrases she'd been frantically studying for the past week. She bowed, not perfectly, but earnestly, and said in halting Japanese that it was an honor to meet him. Nakamura looked delighted. He responded in Japanese, which Thomas translated. He says that a young person who shows interest in other cultures is someone who will lead the future well. He asks what you plan to study in college. International relations, Eliza said, her confidence growing. I want to help people understand each other across cultures, like my dad did. Does. Like he does, she corrected herself, still adjusting to her father being back in his proper career. The meal that followed was exquisite, course after course of food that was as much art as sustenance. But more memorable than the food was the conversation. Nakamura-san told stories about building his company from nothing in post-war Japan, about the mentors who'd believed in him when he was young and unproven. Margaret shared her experiences taking over international operations, despite resistance from board members who thought she was too young, too Western educated, too female. David Singh talked about the pressures of living up to family legacy while trying to forge his own path. And Kenji Nakamura, who'd been quiet through most of the business negotiations, opened up about his struggles with anxiety and how his father's patient teaching had helped him find confidence in leadership. Cassandra found herself sharing, too, about her own journey building Novosphere, about the loneliness of success, about the day she'd realized that the empire she'd built had become a prison of her own making. I spent so many years trying to prove I belonged at the table, she said quietly, trying to prove I was tough enough, smart enough, ruthless enough. And somewhere along the way, I forgot that the point of sitting at the table wasn't to prove anything. It was to actually accomplish something meaningful. Nakamura-san listened intently as Thomas translated, then responded at length. Thomas's translation was thoughtful, capturing nuance that went beyond words. The chairman says that in Japanese there's a concept called mu, emptiness or void, not in a negative sense, but as a space of potential. He says that when we fill our lives too completely with ambition and fear and the need to prove ourselves, there's no room for mu, no space for growth, for change, for wisdom to enter. He says the greatest leaders he's known are those who learn to create emptiness in themselves, to set aside ego long enough to actually see clearly. The words resonated through Cassandra like a bell. She'd spent 3 months changing systems and policies and hiring practices. But the real work, she realized, had been internal, creating space where there had been only defensiveness and pride. Letting go of the need to be right so she could focus on doing right. After dinner, they walked through Midtown together, an unusual group, clearly important but also clearly comfortable with each other. The city was alive with late autumn energy, people spilling out of restaurants and theaters, the kind of Thursday night that felt like celebration for no particular reason except being alive in New York. Thomas walked beside Eliza, their heads bent together as he pointed out landmarks and told her stories about the city. Watching them, Cassandra felt a fierce protectiveness. This man had almost been lost to circumstances beyond his control. This brilliant girl had almost grown up believing her father was less than he was. How many others were out there, still lost, still struggling, still waiting for someone to see them? "You're thinking very seriously for someone who just closed a billion-dollar deal," Margaret said, falling into step beside Cassandra. "I'm thinking about responsibility, about the privilege of having resources and influence, about what we owe to people who don't have those advantages." "Ah, the burden of conscience. It's heavier than most people expect," Margaret smiled. "But it's also what separates leaders from tyrants. The willingness to be bothered by injustice, even when you're not the one suffering from it." They reached Thomas's building first, a modest apartment in Queens, nice but nothing extravagant. He'd been looking at places closer to Manhattan, neighborhoods that matched his new salary, but hadn't pulled the trigger yet. Too many years of financial trauma made it hard to believe the stability would last. "Dad," Eliza said as they reached the entrance. "Can I say something in front of everyone?" Thomas looked nervous. "Of course." Eliza turned to face the group. Cassandra, the Nakamura Singh executives, Margaret, and David and Kenji, all these powerful people who'd come to respect her father. 3 months ago, I was mad at the world. My dad was the smartest person I knew, and he was driving people around like he was nobody. I watched him pretend to be okay with it, watched him lie to me about having important work when really he was just trying to keep me from knowing how bad things were. And I felt helpless. Her voice wavered but held. "Miss Vale, I know my dad has thanked you, but I need to thank you too. Not just for giving him a job, though that's huge, but for seeing him, for recognizing that someone driving your car might be more than just a driver. Most people never look. Most people never see. You did. And it gave me my dad back." Cassandra felt tears threaten and didn't bother fighting them. "Eliza, your father saved me at least as much as I helped him. Maybe more. I was so lost in my own importance that I'd forgotten how to be human. He reminded me." Nakamura-san spoke in Japanese, and Thomas translated with a smile. "The chairman says that the best business partnerships are those where everyone gives more than they take, and everyone receives more than they expected. He says this is true of our companies, but also true of us as people." They said their goodbyes with promises to meet again soon. There would be months of integration work ahead, plenty of dinners and meetings and negotiations. But as Cassandra rode back to Manhattan in the car service, she felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with signed contracts. The following Monday, Novasphere held its quarterly all-hands meeting. These were usually tedious affairs. PowerPoint presentations about metrics, carefully scripted remarks from executives, questions from employees that were really just disguised complaints about parking or cafeteria food. But this time, Cassandra had asked to change the format. No slides, no podium. Just her, standing in the center of the room with a microphone, talking to the 800 people who made her company function. 3 months ago, she began, I was about to lose everything I'd built, and I was too arrogant to recognize that the help I desperately needed was sitting in the front seat of my car. She told them the story. Not a sanitized, PR-approved version, but the real one. About the cruel words she'd said, about her desperation, about Thomas's credentials and his circumstances and the decision to give him a chance, about everything that had followed. "I'm telling you this," she said, "because I want you to understand that change is possible. Not easy, not comfortable, but possible. I want you to know that I spent 20 years building a company based on some very narrow assumptions about what talent looks like, what success means, what matters, and I was wrong about a lot of it." She could see people shifting in their seats, unsure where this was going. "We've launched the Second Chance initiative, and it's already bringing incredible talent into this organization. But I don't want us to stop there. I want us to examine every assumption we've made about hiring, about advancement, about who gets opportunities and why. I want us to become the kind of company where people's worth is measured by their contributions and their character, not by their age or their recent job title or whether they had a gap in their resume because they were caring for a sick parent or raising children or recovering from an illness." She paused, looking around the room at faces young and old, skeptical and hopeful, uncertain and engaged. "I can't promise this will be easy. Cultural change never is. Some of you will resist it because it threatens systems you've learned to navigate. Some of you will push too hard, too fast, and create new problems while trying to solve old ones. We're going to make mistakes, but I'd rather make mistakes while trying to do something meaningful than succeed at perpetuating something broken." When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Then applause. Not the polite corporate clapping of obligation, but genuine, sustained applause. And Cassandra saw something she'd never seen at one of these meetings before. People crying. Older employees, younger employees, people who'd apparently been waiting years for someone in leadership to acknowledge that the system was flawed. Thomas found her afterward in her office. "That was brave," he said, "admitting fault in front of the entire company. A lot of CEOs wouldn't have the courage." "A lot of CEOs wouldn't have the necessity," Cassandra replied. "I was forced to confront my own failures in a very public way. Might as well own it. Still, it matters." He sat down in the visitor chair, and Cassandra noticed how comfortable he'd become in these spaces. The nervousness was gone, replaced by quiet confidence. "I wanted to talk to you about something. The initiative is working, but we're being reactive. People come to us after they've already been sidelined. I think we need to be proactive. Partner with unemployment offices, professional organizations, veteran services. Find people before they've spent years being rejected." "I love that idea. Put together a proposal and we'll present it to the board." "There's something else." Thomas hesitated. "I've been getting calls. Other companies asking about our model, wanting to implement something similar. Some of them want to hire me as a consultant to help them set up their own programs." Cassandra felt a spike of alarm. "Are you leaving?" "No, God, no. Novasphere is home now. But I was thinking, what if this becomes something bigger than just our company? What if we share what we've learned, help other organizations see the talent they're missing? We could change the landscape, not just our little corner of it." The idea was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying, building something that outlasted them, that created systemic change rather than isolated examples. It was ambitious. It was idealistic. It was exactly what Cassandra wanted to spend the rest of her career doing. "Let's do it," she said. "Not as a side project, but as a core part of what Novasphere stands for. We become known not just for our products or our profits, but for our approach to people." They spent the next 2 hours sketching out possibilities, arguing good-naturedly about implementation details, getting excited about potential impact. It felt like the early days of Novasphere when Cassandra had been building something from nothing and everything had seemed possible. Except this time, she wasn't alone. This time she had partners who challenged her, supported her, called her out when she slipped back into old patterns. Thomas, Marcus, Sarah, Patricia, Jennifer, a team that functioned because they trusted each other enough to be honest. That evening, Cassandra did something she hadn't done in years. She left the office at 6 p.m. Not because there wasn't work to do, there was always work to do, but because she'd realized that presence mattered more than hours logged. She took the subway home, something she hadn't done since her early days in the city when she couldn't afford cars and drivers. The train was packed with people heading home from work, everyone exhausted, but also relieved. Another day survived. Cassandra found herself studying faces, wondering about their stories. The woman in scrubs who'd probably just finished a hospital shift. The young man with paint under his fingernails who might be an artist or a contractor. The elderly gentleman reading a Russian newspaper, his past and his journey a mystery. How many of them had talents the world wasn't seeing? How many had been dismissed, overlooked, underestimated? How many could change everything if someone just gave them a chance? Her phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. It was a photo of him and Eliza in their apartment, both of them grinning at the camera. The caption read, "Movie night, first one in months where I'm not too exhausted to stay awake. Thank you for giving me back my evenings." Cassandra smiled and typed back, "Thank you for giving me back my conscience." "Fair trade," came the reply. Then a moment later, "Also, Eliza says you need to teach her how to negotiate like you do. She has some concerns about her debate team's approach to nationals. Tell her I'll take her to lunch next week. I could use her perspective on the youth outreach programs we're developing. She's 15. And probably smarter than half my VPs. Age is just a number, remember? We're supposed to be learning that." Touché. When Cassandra reached her apartment, she didn't immediately pour wine and stare out the windows like she used to. Instead, she called her sister, something she hadn't done in months, maybe years if she was honest. They talked for an hour, catching up on family news, reconnecting across the distance that Cassandra's ambition had created. She ordered takeout from a neighborhood place instead of having something delivered from a five-star restaurant. She ate while watching a nature documentary, something mindless and beautiful. She went to bed at 10 p.m. and slept the deep, dreamless sleep of someone whose conscience was finally clear. The weeks that followed were busy but purposeful. The Nakamura-Singh integration moved forward smoothly, Thomas anticipating and preventing potential friction points before they became problems. The Second Chance initiative expanded, bringing in more talent and more attention. Media requests kept flooding in, and Cassandra accepted some while declining others, learning to balance visibility with actually doing the work. But the moment that defined everything came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, 6 months after Thomas's first day as SVP. Cassandra was in her office reviewing proposals when Patricia buzzed through. "Miss Vale, you have a visitor. He says he used to be your driver." Cassandra felt her stomach drop. Thomas? But no, Thomas was in meetings all afternoon. Then who? A man in his 60s entered, wearing a maintenance uniform from the building. Cassandra recognized him vaguely, one of the janitorial staff, someone she'd passed in hallways for years without really seeing. "Miss Vale, I'm sorry to bother you. I'm Robert Chen. I work maintenance on floors 40 through 50. "Of course. What can I do for you, Mr. Chen?" He held a folder in work-roughened hands. "I heard about your program, the Second Chance Initiative. I heard you're looking for experienced people who've been overlooked." He opened the folder, revealing a resume that made Cassandra's eyes widen. PhD in mechanical engineering from MIT. 20 years at Boeing designing aircraft systems. Published papers on aerodynamics and materials science. Patents for innovations that were probably in planes flying overhead right now. "I lost my position in the 2008 recession," Robert said quietly. "I was 55 years old. Every job interview ended the same way. Too old, too expensive, too many younger candidates available. I spent through my savings, my retirement, everything. I've been working maintenance for 8 years now. It pays the bills. But Miss Vale, I used to design systems that kept people safe at 40,000 feet, and I think I still could, if someone would let me." Cassandra looked at this man, this brilliant, accomplished, utterly wasted man, and felt rage. Not at him, but at every system that had failed him, every company that had seen his age and never bothered looking at his credentials, every interview where he'd been dismissed because his recent job title was janitor instead of engineer. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion churning inside her, "we're expanding our engineering division. I'd like you to meet with our head of product development tomorrow morning. Bring your portfolio, your patents, any designs you've been working on in your spare time. We're going to find the right position for you." His hands trembled as he closed the folder. Just like that? Just like that. Because I'm tired of living in a world where people like you clean floors when you should be designing the future. And because someone once taught me that looking past job titles to see actual human beings isn't charity, it's just good business sense. After Robert left, floating, disbelieving, hopeful, Cassandra sat in her office and cried. Not sad tears, but angry ones. Angry at how many people were out there, brilliant and capable and completely invisible. Angry at how close she'd come to being part of the problem forever. Angry at every moment she'd wasted on things that didn't matter, but also grateful. Grateful for the rain that had forced her to acknowledge her driver. Grateful for the crisis that had forced her to see him clearly. Grateful for every lesson learned through humility and desperation and the willingness to change. That evening, she called an emergency executive meeting. Everyone gathered in the conference room looking worried. Emergency meetings usually meant crisis. Instead, Cassandra told them about Robert Chen, about his credentials and his circumstances, and the 8 years he'd spent cleaning their offices while capable of so much more. How many more are there? She asked. How many people work in this building, in buildings all over this city, this country, who have gifts we're not seeing because we've made assumptions about what value looks like? The question hung in the air, uncomfortable and necessary. Thomas spoke first. We could start internal, review personnel files for everyone in non-professional roles, see who has credentials or experience beyond their current position, give them pathways to transition into roles that match their capabilities. Won't that create operational problems? Marcus asked. If we're pulling people out of maintenance and security and administrative roles into professional positions? Then we hire replacements who need those jobs, Sarah said, and we pay them well, with dignity, and without assuming that's all they'll ever be capable of. We make every job a stepping stone if people want it to be. It'll be expensive, James warned. Retraining programs, transitions, potential litigation from people who feel passed over. It'll be worth it, Cassandra said firmly, because the alternative is continuing to waste human potential, and I'm done with that. We're doing this. Company-wide review starting next week. Everyone who wants to be considered for different roles gets considered. No assumptions, no age limits, no, that's not how we've done things. We're rewriting the rules. The initiative that followed was chaotic, complicated, and occasionally controversial. Not everyone wanted to transition. Some people genuinely loved their current roles and had no interest in change. Some people couldn't make the leap. Their skills weren't transferable, or they weren't willing to do the training required. But enough people succeeded that it transformed the company. The security guard who turned out to have a master's in computer science became their new head of cybersecurity. The receptionist with a law degree from the Philippines, not recognized in the US, joined their legal team after passing the bar. The driver who'd once been a professional chef redesigned their entire corporate cafeteria program, turning it into something people actually looked forward to. And Robert Chen, the maintenance worker with the PhD in engineering, ended up leading the design team for Novasphere's new satellite communication system. His first presentation to the board was so brilliant that 2 board members literally applauded when he finished. The media coverage intensified. More companies began reaching out, wanting to replicate the model. Some were sincere. Others were clearly just chasing positive PR. Thomas and Cassandra worked together to create a framework that other organizations could adapt, refusing to charge for it because making it expensive would defeat the purpose. Within a year, the Second Chance initiative had become a movement. Dozens of companies had launched similar programs. Thousands of people had found meaningful work that matched their capabilities. The employment landscape was shifting, slowly but perceptibly, towards something more humane. But for Cassandra, the real measure of success came on a Saturday afternoon in spring, 14 months after the rainy Thursday that had changed everything. Novasphere was hosting a company picnic in Central Park, something she'd never bothered with before because it seemed like a waste of time. Now, watching hundreds of employees and their families scattered across the grass, she understood what she'd been missing. Thomas was there with Eliza, who was teaching some of the younger kids how to say hello in different languages. Patricia was organizing a volleyball game with the intensity of someone who'd been waiting years to have coworkers she actually liked. Robert Chen was showing a group of fascinated children model airplanes he'd built, explaining aerodynamics in terms simple enough for 8-year-olds to understand. Marcus appeared beside her, 2 beers in hand. You look contemplative. I'm thinking about the alternate universe where I didn't need an interpreter that day, where I never saw Thomas as anything more than a driver, where none of this happened. Scary thought, Marcus agreed. That version of you would probably still be successful, still rich, still powerful. Still empty, Cassandra finished. Still building monuments to my own ego instead of anything meaningful. She took the beer he offered. I used to think success meant being the smartest person in the room. Now, I think it means creating rooms where everyone gets to be smart. That's very philosophical for a corporate picnic. I'm allowed one profound thought per quarter. It's in my contract. They watched the scene before them, people laughing, playing, connecting. Not as hierarchies or org charts, but as humans who happen to work together. This was what she'd been chasing all along without knowing it. Not empire, not domination, just community, just purpose. Just the simple satisfaction of knowing that the work she did made people's lives better rather than worse. Thomas approached, Eliza trailing behind him with grass stains on her jeans and a smile that suggested she'd been having the time of her life. "There's someone I want you to meet," Thomas said. He gestured to a young woman nearby, early 30s, professional but casual, watching the gathering with the keen observation of someone who noticed everything. "This is Rebecca Song. She's a journalist writing a long-form piece about the initiative for the Atlantic. I promised her an honest conversation, which means she gets to ask uncomfortable questions." "I live for uncomfortable questions these days," Cassandra said, extending her hand. "What do you want to know?" They found a quiet spot under a tree, away from the main gathering, but still within sight of it. Rebecca pulled out a recorder, asked permission to use it, and then dove straight into the deep end. "Miss Vale, critics of the Second Chance Initiative say it's just smart PR, that you're benefiting from positive media coverage while exploiting workers' desperation, that you're still a billionaire CEO making decisions that serve your interests first. How do you respond?" Cassandra appreciated the directness. "Some of that is probably true. I'm not going to pretend my motives are purely altruistic. The initiative makes business sense. We get access to incredible talent our competitors ignore. I get positive press that makes our stock price rise. And yes, I'm still absurdly wealthy while many people struggle. The system that allowed me to accumulate this much wealth is fundamentally broken." Rebecca's eyebrows rose. "That's not the response I expected. I'm learning that honesty is more productive than defensiveness. Do I think I'm some kind of savior? No. I'm a person who almost ruined my own company through arrogance and got lucky enough to learn from it before the damage was permanent. Do I think one company's hiring practices can solve systemic inequality? Also no. But it's something. It's better than nothing. And maybe if enough companies do something, eventually we reach critical mass where the system itself changes. Some people say you're only doing this because you got caught being cruel to an employee, that without that specific incident, you'd never have changed." "They're absolutely right," Cassandra agreed. "I needed to hit bottom before I could start climbing back up. That's not noble, it's just true. But here's the thing, everyone hits bottom eventually. Everyone has moments where they're forced to confront who they really are versus who they think they are. The question isn't whether you have those moments, it's what you do after." They talked for another hour, covering everything from implementation challenges to long-term vision to the personal toll of public criticism. Rebecca asked hard questions, and Cassandra gave honest answers, even when those answers didn't make her look good. Finally, Rebecca asked, "What do you want people to take away from your story? If someone reads this article, what do you hope they learn?" Cassandra thought about the question seriously. "I hope they learn that change is possible. Not easy, not comfortable, but possible. I hope they learn that the people we dismiss, the people we overlook, the people we treat as invisible, they're not actually invisible. We just aren't looking. And I hope they learn that success measured purely in profit and power is hollow. Real success is building something that makes the world even slightly less cruel than you found it." After Rebecca left, Cassandra remained under the tree, watching her company, her people, enjoy a spring afternoon. Thomas joined her again, sitting on the grass beside her like they were old friends rather than CEO and employee. "You handled that well," he said. "The interview. A year ago, you would have gotten defensive. A year ago, I wouldn't have done the interview at all. I would have had PR draft a statement and hidden behind corporate speak. She picked at the grass absently. Thomas, can I ask you something? Do you ever regret it? Taking the job with me, I mean. Your life was simpler when you were just driving. Less scrutiny, less pressure, less responsibility. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, every job has pressure. Driving had the pressure of knowing I was capable of more and choosing not to pursue it because I was too scared of more rejection. This has the pressure of high stakes and public visibility. But at least now, when I'm stressed, it's because I'm attempting something difficult, not because I'm hiding from my own potential. I worry sometimes that I've made your life harder. You've made my life complicated. That's different from harder. Complicated can be good. It means growth, challenge, meaning. He smiled. Besides, Eliza got her father back. That alone would be worth any amount of complication. As if summoned by her name, Eliza appeared, breathless and excited. Dad, Miss Vale, you have to come see this. Mr. Chen built a model rocket, and we're about to launch it, and it's amazing. They followed her to where a crowd had gathered around Robert Chen and his creation, a 3-foot-tall model rocket painted in Novasphere's colors, complete with tiny cameras and what looked like an actual guidance system. It's just a hobby project, Robert said modestly, but his eyes shone with pride. Been working on it in my spare time. Thought the kids might enjoy it. We're not just kids, one teenager protested. I'm 17, and this is legitimately cool engineering. They counted down together, 20 people shouting numbers in unison. And when the rocket launched, streaking into the blue spring sky, trailing smoke and joy, the cheer that went up was pure and uninhibited. Children jumped and screamed, adults applauded, someone's dog barked excitedly at the spectacle. And Cassandra, watching it all, felt something she'd been chasing her entire career without knowing what it was. Not success, not achievement, not power or recognition or validation, just joy. Simple, uncomplicated joy in a moment shared with people who mattered. The rocket reached its apex, deployed a parachute, and drifted back down to Earth. People scattered to track its landing, laughing and running through the grass like the children they once were, and occasionally still could be. Thomas stood beside her, and they watched in comfortable silence as their company, their community, celebrated a perfect spring day. Thank you, Cassandra said quietly, for that day in the car, for being patient with me, for teaching me that leadership isn't about being the most important person in the room. It's about making sure everyone in the room knows they're important. You taught yourself that, Thomas replied. I just gave you the circumstances where you couldn't avoid learning it. Still, thank you. You're welcome. And Cassandra? It was the first time he'd used her first name. Thank you for looking. Most people never do. Most people never see past the surface. You did. Eventually. When it mattered. That's worth something. They stood there as the afternoon stretched toward evening, as the picnic gradually wound down, as families packed up blankets and leftover food and sleepy children. Cassandra didn't want the day to end. Didn't want to return to the complexity of running a company and managing stakeholders and navigating the endless demands of corporate leadership. But she also knew that when Monday came, she'd face it differently than she had a year ago, with humility instead of arrogance, with curiosity instead of assumption, with the understanding that every person she encountered, from the CEO of a partner company to the person cleaning her office at night, was carrying a story that mattered, possessed dignity that deserved recognition, had potential that might change everything if someone just bothered to see it. That evening, back in her apartment, Cassandra stood at her windows one more time, looking out at the city that had been both her kingdom and her cage. The view hadn't changed, but she had. The buildings were still tall, the streets still crowded, the lights still bright. But now when she looked at Manhattan, she didn't see territory to conquer. She saw 8 million people, each with their own struggles and gifts and stories, each worthy of being seen. Her phone buzzed. A text from Thomas. Eliza wants to know if you'd come to her school next month. They're doing career day and she asked if you'd talk about leadership. Fair warning, she'll definitely ask uncomfortable questions in front of everyone. Cassandra smiled and typed back, Tell her yes, and tell her the uncomfortable questions are my favorite part now. Character development, came the reply. Also, she's already planning your whole talk, something about embracing failure as a learning opportunity. I think you've created a monster. Good. The world needs more monsters who ask uncomfortable questions and expect honest answers. She set her phone down and walked away from the windows. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new crises, new opportunities to either grow or fall back into old patterns. But tonight, she was just going to be present. Make dinner, call her sister. Maybe watch a movie or read a book or do something that had nothing to do with markets or mergers or corporate strategy. Because she'd finally learned what Thomas had been trying to teach her from the beginning, that life wasn't something that happened between important moments. The ordinary moments, the quiet evenings, the casual conversations, the simple acts of seeing and being seen, those were the important ones. Everything else was just infrastructure. And as Cassandra Vail, CEO of Novosphere Global, formerly one of Fortune's most powerful women in business, currently just a person trying to do better than she'd done before, settled into her couch with takeout and a nature documentary, she felt something she'd been missing for longer than she could remember. Peace. Not perfection, not completion, not the absence of challenge or struggle, just the quiet peace of knowing that today she'd tried to be a little bit better than yesterday, and tomorrow she'd try again. The city lights glowed outside her windows. Somewhere out there, Thomas was having dinner with Eliza. Robert Chen was probably still thinking about rockets. Patricia Coleman was ending her day satisfied with work that mattered. And countless others, people she'd never meet, people whose names she'd never know, were living their own stories of resilience and hope and the daily courage it took to keep going when the world seemed determined to overlook them. She couldn't fix everything. She couldn't save everyone. But she could do her part. She could look when others wouldn't. She could see what others missed. She could build something that honored human dignity instead of crushing it. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Not perfect, but enough. Not a fairy tale ending, but a real one. The kind where people were messy and complicated and sometimes cruel, but also capable of change, of growth, of becoming something better than they'd been. The kind where a CEO could learn humility from her driver, where a man could reclaim his dignity through patience and skill, where a company could become a community and success could mean something more than profit. The kind where everyone, absolutely everyone, deserved to be seen. And in that moment, sitting in her apartment with cheap takeout and expensive windows, Cassandra Vail understood that this was the story she wanted to tell with the rest of her life. Not the story of how she built an empire, but the story of how she learned to see the people inside it. How she learned that the most revolutionary thing a person with power could do was simply acknowledge the humanity of people without it. It wasn't a perfect story, but it was hers, and that was enough.